What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, Omni-sensei. Welcome to What If I Was in Marvel as Spider-Man, Conqueror of Multiverse, Part 17. Hit that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed. Also, remember to check out the original story, link in the description. Without further ado, let's get into it. The silence that followed hung heavy in the air. Peter pressed on. And the military? Are you all still working as one cohesive force, or is it scattered? The Major sighed, his shoulders slumping. We're fractured, and I don't know how many of us are left. I was sent here to evacuate civilians and contain the outbreak, but since we arrived, we've heard nothing. We're running low on supplies, food, and ammo. Every day is a struggle to keep the infected at bay while we try to save as many as we can. Peter absorbed the information, his mind working quickly. After a moment of contemplation, he looked directly at the Major. Here's my offer, Major. Join me. I have food, ammo, and a plan to get more. Together, we stand a better chance. What do you say? Major Lewis hesitated, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. I can't make promises. I'm still hoping for orders from higher-ups, but I'm not holding my breath. Peter leaned forward, his gaze intense. What if I can help with the food and ammo shortage? Will you consider joining forces and working together to clear this town of the infected? The Major raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched across his face. Clear the whole town? That's a tall order, even for someone like you. Peter smirked, a glint of confidence in his eyes. How about a deal, then? If I help solve your food and ammo problem, then you and your men agree to follow my orders until the town is clear. We work together to clear the town, and when it's free of infected, you and your men can decide whether or not you want to stick around. Deal. Major Lewis contemplated the proposal, weighing the risks and benefit. Solve my immediate problems, and we can work together to clear the town. But we need those supplies fast. We won't last another couple days without food. And if we can really do as you say and clear the town without any unnecessary losses, then I'll gladly join you. Peter extended a hand, sealing the agreement. You have my word. I won't put any of your men in unnecessary harm, and by the end of the week, this town will be completely free of infected. As their hands met in a firm handshake, Major Lewis couldn't help but feel a mix of uncertainty and hope. The alliance forged in that small office would either be their salvation or a path to greater peril. Hee, it's finally time to start building our base of operations, Peter thought as he looked out of the windows, surveying the town outside with a greedy look in his eye. Suddenly, the Major spoke, breaking Peter from his thoughts. So, how are you going to solve our supply problem? He asked and continued before Peter could answer. I know you have supplies of your own, but 3 cars of food can't feed over 50 patients, 20 hospital staff, 300 civilians, and 500 soldiers. And you certainly don't have enough ammo. Peter smiles assuredly. First, I'm willing to share my supplies if it comes to that, but it won't? He shook his head. For food, most supermarkets have probably been looted by now, and they wouldn't have enough food for everyone here anyway, so we'll go for distribution centers. Companies often store a significant amount of their food inventory in distribution centers or warehouses. These facilities are strategically located to streamline the distribution to stores in the vicinity of them. Peter continued. I don't have the exact locations yet, but it won't take long to find the closest warehouses. Though, when I do find them, I'll need your men to help transport everything. After all, if it's just my group doing it, we'll only be able to bring back a small amount. Ideally, I'd like to get as many trucks as we can and completely empty every warehouse we loot. The Major nodded his head. Sure, I'll assign some men to help deliver the supplies. What about our ammo? Peter smirked. Fort Benning is close by, isn't it? As Peter continued his discussion with Major Lewis about securing supplies, MJ, having just taken a warm shower and changed into fresh clothes, set out to explore the hospital. Her mission was clear: locate the person they had initially come for, the one she and her husband deemed crucial for their group. Rick Grimes, the former sheriff's deputy who had been in a coma since a life-threatening gunshot wound, was their next potential recruit. Wandering through the hospital, MJ discreetly searched every room. After a few minutes, she eventually arrived at a room on the 5th floor. Pushing the door open, she found Rick lying motionless in a hospital bed, a silent figure oblivious to the chaotic world outside. His face seemed peaceful, untouched by the horrors that had unfolded during his slumber. MJ couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and pity. The man before her had slept through the entire outbreak. His wife was cheating on him with his best friend, and he wasn't meant to wake up for another month. With a cautious step forward, MJ approached Rick's bedside. She confirmed his identity, her gaze lingering on his face for a moment before she turned her attention to the task at hand. She knew what needed to be done. Peter had taught her a healing spell, a modest yet effective technique to awaken those in a deep sleep or coma. Checking the surroundings to ensure no one was watching, MJ cast the spell. A soft glow enveloped her fingers as she extended her hand toward Rick. With precision, she tapped his forehead, unleashing a surge of eldritch energy. In response to the mystical touch, Rick's eyes snapped open. A sudden gasp escaped his lips as he jolted upright, disoriented and struggling for breath. The medical equipment in the room, powered by the hospital's emergency generators, beeped urgently, sending signals echoing down the hospital corridors. Nurses, alarmed by the commotion, hurried to Rick's room. Their faces registered a mix of surprise and confusion as they witnessed the seemingly miraculous awakening of a patient who had been in a deep coma for over a week now. One nurse eyed MJ warily and asked, "What are you doing in here?" MJ shrugged. "I was just walking by and heard the beeping." After finalizing their agreement in Major Lewis's office, Peter and the Major stepped out into the hospital hallway, greeted by the sight of two guards. Even now, the soldiers looked at Peter in a mix of awe and respect, the image of him battling hundreds of zombies alone and winning fresh in their mind. As they were about to discuss the next steps, an officer hurriedly approached them. "Sir, there's a commotion outside," the officer reported, saluting Major Lewis. "One of the patients just woke up, and he's trying to leave against the doctor's orders. The hospital staff are having a hard time convincing him to stay for further recovery." Peter, a knowing smile playing on his lips, instantly realized who the patient was. Without waiting for the Major's response, he turned to the officer. "Lead the way." Following the officer through the bustling hospital, they arrived at the scene of the commotion. Rick Grimes, still weak from his time in a coma, was making his way toward the hospital gate. 2 doctors and 4 nurses surrounded him, attempting to restrain him and convince him to stay. As Peter approached, his presence immediately causing a hushed silence among the civilians and soldiers outside, recognizing him as the war god that saved them earlier in the day. The head doctor, unaware of Peter's arrival, spoke, "Mr. Grimes, you really should stay and recover. Your body needs time to heal, especially after something as serious as a gunshot wound and a coma," the head doctor insisted. Rick, determined and slightly frustrated, met the doctor's gaze. "I appreciate what you've done here, but I can't afford to stay. I have a family out there, and they need me. I won't sit around while they could be in danger." Peter, understanding Rick's urgency, stepped forward. "Doc, just let him go. You can't force treatment on those who don't want it." Reluctantly, the doctors and nurses released Rick, knowing they couldn't force him to stay. The head doctor, with a sigh, addressed Rick, "Fine, you can go. But promise me you'll clean the wound and change the bandage frequently. We can't have you getting an infection out there. You also need to eat nutrient-rich foods and exercise to regain some muscle mass after spending over a week in bed." Rick nodded appreciatively, and as he started to walk toward the hospital gate, Peter quickly made his way to his group's cars. He cleared out Michonne's car, gathering an extra police radio, a pistol, a box of ammo, and some food and water. Starting the car up, he drove up to the gate just as Rick was about to step outside. Peter pulled up next to Rick, rolling down the window. "Hey, need a ride? It's safer to drive than walk," he said as he hopped out of the driver's seat. "I can't." Rick tried to refuse, but Peter wouldn't let him. "It's fine. Just take it. I have 2 other cars anyway, and this is the shitty one of the 3. He said, as he motioned to the passenger seat, where all of the supplies he gathered for Rick sat. "Those should help you get a good head start on your search." "Thank you." Rick didn't know what to say. He knew that the car and supplies must be worth a lot, especially during an apocalypse, so he felt bad for taking it all. Nonetheless, he accepted Peter's generosity and hopped in the driver's seat. Before Rick could drive off, Peter spoke. "Listen, bring your family back here when you find them. I'm planning to clear this town of the infected and turn it into a safe haven for survivors. Use the radio to call us if you need help. It's already on the right frequency. And most of all, be careful with that gun. The sound will attract any infected in the area and they'll swarm the hell out of you." Rick hesitated for a moment, grateful for the unexpected help. "Thank you again," he said sincerely. "I'll find my family and bring them back here. You've done a lot for us." With a nod, Peter watched as Rick drove off, determined to reunite with his family. As the car disappeared into the distance, Peter walked back into the hospital grounds, his mind swirling with plans for the future. He seems to be the same as the show, Peter thought as he delved into his mind while they chatted earlier, just as he did with Michonne. He'll make a good subordinate like the Major. Back inside the gated hospital, Peter found his group standing there, wondering why he just gave away their car, especially Michonne, as it was her car to begin with. With a determined glint in his eye, Peter spoke, "All of you need to get ready to head out. We're going on a supply run in 1 hour. Gather what you need and meet at the cars." The group glanced between one another, before turning to Sarah and Andre, the children of the group. They didn't mind following Peter on a supply run, especially after seeing his display of power against the zombies earlier. But what about the kids? Joel voiced everyone's thoughts. Peter looked thoughtful for a moment. "You're right, now that we have a base, it's not very smart to bring children out there. What?" Sarah exclaimed, annoyance clear in her voice. "I want to help too. I'm not a child. You can't just leave me behind. I don't even know these people." Peter sighed alongside her father, who knew this would be a hard pill for her to swallow. Finally, Joel stepped in front of her, a reluctant, yet serious, look on his face. "Listen, Sarah, you've always been mature for your age. Hell, you've been cooking and taking care of me ever since you were 6 years old, but you're only 13. Yeah, you're not as young as Andre, but you're still a child and this is dangerous stuff we're planning on doing." He pauses for a moment and looks her in the eye. "I don't want to lose you, baby girl." Suddenly, tears began to well up in Sarah's eyes as she dove forward, wrapping her father into a tight hug. "I don't want to lose you either, Daddy." Peter and MJ smiled at the heartwarming moment. "You won't lose him," Peter said, breaking the two from their hug. "I'll make sure nothing happens to your father while he's gone." Sarah wanted to refute his words. After all, the world was a dangerous place right now and one person couldn't guarantee her father's safety. But then, she remembered Peter decimating the zombie horde earlier. Like a one-man army, he stood off against hundreds of infected and came out victorious. Sarah stared straight into Peter's eyes. "Fine, but if anything happens to him or my Uncle Tommy..." She trailed off, a dangerous look appearing in her young eyes. Peter smirked. Yes, you'll make my life a living hell, kill me, feed me to some wild dogs. I get it." Sarah nodded her head matter-of-factly. "As long as you understand." Joel and Tommy couldn't help but smile as they watched Sarah do her best to threaten Peter. Their hearts warmed as they knew she was just worried for them. Before everyone could rush off to prepare, Joel spoke. "She does have a point about not knowing anyone here. Maybe one of us should stay behind as well." After a moment of silence, Michonne stepped forward. "I'll stay behind," she said, her son cuddled safe in her arms. "Andre needs a bit more attention and care, so I should probably stay and make sure he's fed and changed properly." "Alright, then that settles it," Peter says, clapping hands to draw everyone's attention. "Michonne will stay to look after the kids while the rest of us head out to gather supplies." After everyone had gathered their gear and prepared for the supply run, they returned to the cars to find Peter waiting for them. The car that was once filled with supplies was now completely empty, while the other car was jam-packed with everything. Even the driver's seat was filled with supplies, making it impossible to drive for the time being. Curious looks were exchanged among the group, prompting Peter to address the unspoken question. "We'll be taking one car this time," he explained. "I've got plans to pick up a few 18-wheeler trucks on the way, which you'll each be driving." Nodding in understanding, the group marveled at the foresight Peter displayed in his preparations. As they settled into the car, armed to the teeth with assault rifles and pistols, MJ occupied the passenger seat while Joel and Tommy took their positions in the back. Peter maneuvered the car to the hospital gate, where Major Lewis awaited. Rolling down his window, Peter reminded the Major to stay on the agreed radio frequency. "I'll contact you once we've secured the first warehouse," he assured. The Major nodded assuredly. "Once you give the word, I'll send my men over to help load and transport everything back here," he affirmed confidently. With the plan in place, the gate opened, and Peter drove the group out of the city. As they left, Joel couldn't help but ask, "So, do you have some sort of deal going on with that guy?" "Yeah, he agreed to." Peter explained everything that he and Major spoke about earlier. A couple hours later, after finding two 18-wheelers along the way, which were currently being driven by Joel and Tommy, the group pulled up to a large, secluded warehouse along the highway outside of town. Thanks to some paperwork at a supermarket near the hospital, they were able to easily find the addresses to 5 separate food distribution centers, and this was the closest one to town. "Huh, look at that on the roof," Joel muttered over the radio as they surveyed the area. Just as they feared, the warehouse was swarming with zombies outside, but the building seemed to be locked tight. But that wasn't what caught Joel's attention. On the roof of the building was a large piece of cardboard, which seems to be taped in place. It read, "Help, people trapped inside." "If I were them, I wouldn't be advertising my whereabouts," Tommy criticized. But he was right. After all, they had a warehouse full of food in there, so they could survive for a pretty long time. It was fairly dumb to call for help, as anyone that saves them would be staking a claim to their food, and that's if they're kind people. Others would probably just shoot them and take everything. Seconds later, Peter's voice appeared on the radio. "Well, they probably still think the police or the military is going to come and save them." Parking the vehicles at a safe distance and getting out, Peter observed the surroundings. "Alright, same as before. You guys find an elevated position, where the zombies can't reach, and I'll keep them busy down below while you pick them off from above," he instructed, his hand resting on the handle of Michonne's sword. "What about the people inside?" Joel asks warily. Peter shrugged. "We save them and then recruit them. If they don't want to join us, which is unlikely to happen, then we'll send them on their way with a hefty amount of supplies." "And if they're hostile?" Tommy asked. "Then they die." Inside the warehouse, a group of employees who had been working during the outbreak found themselves trapped, along with their families who thought taking refuge in a food-filled warehouse was a sensible idea. The large hordes of zombies roaming around the building made escape impossible, leaving them locked inside. However, despite being confined for a few days, the food supplies were vast, and they hadn't made the tiniest dent in the rows and stacks of boxes. The warehouse held the potential for survival, especially with an abundance of bottled water that could last them for at least a year. Hope lingered among the group as they clung to the belief that the military, police, or some government agency would eventually come to their rescue. This hope manifested in a sign taped to the side of the building's roof, a desperate plea for help, expecting their saviors to arrive promptly upon seeing the message. As they sat, awaiting rescue just like every other day, the sudden sound of gunfire echoed through the air outside. Rushing to the windows, they anticipated the arrival of the authorities to clear out the infected. To their shock, what unfolded before their eyes was far from expected. A lone man, wielding a sword with deadly precision, dashed between the zombie hordes outside. He moved with unparalleled speed, decapitating the infected effortlessly. Each swing of his sword cut through packed groups, leaving a trail of severed heads and blood. The people trapped inside the warehouse watched in awe, questioning if this was a divine intervention. The sound of gunfire accompanied the sword-wielding savior. On top of two 18-wheeler trucks nearby, a group of 3 individuals armed with assault rifles unleashed a barrage of bullets upon the infected. The synchronized gunfire picked off zombies one by one, keeping a distance from the sword-wielding hero, as they didn't want to accidentally shoot him. The trapped survivors, filled with a mixture of shock and awe, witnessed the unknown group of 4 swiftly clearing the area of infected. It became evident that these strangers were their unexpected saviors, a stark contrast to the anticipated arrival of government forces. As the last of the zombies fell to the ground, the sword-wielding man approached the entrance of the warehouse, which they rushed to open for him. He sheathed his sword and gave a reassuring nod to those inside. Peter waved casually. "Yo, we saw your sign." The survivors hesitated for a moment, still processing the surreal turn of events. Slowly, they began to realize that their salvation had come not from the government, but from a seemingly unstoppable force led by a man of extraordinary skill. One of the survivors, a man with a grizzled beard and a worn-out baseball cap, finally spoke up. Who are you?" "I'm Peter." The man with the sword, now identified as Peter, offered a confident smile. "We're here to help. We'll get you out of here and back to safety. We have a camp in the nearby town that's protected by a group of military guys. If you want, you can join." And that was more than enough to win them over. They had been waiting for the military to show up, and although they didn't, they were at least nearby. With a newfound sense of hope and gratitude, the trapped survivors hurriedly began voicing their agreement. After all, where else were they supposed to go? With the trapped civilians inside the warehouse overwhelmingly agreeable, and the once menacing zombies cleared from the vicinity, Peter left them in MJ's capable hands. As he stepped away from the bustling scene, he pulled out his radio, signaling the Major. "Major, this is Peter. We've secured a warehouse with survivors and food. The address is Mumbo Jumbo. They'll need transport back to camp along with the food. We've already got 2 18-wheelers with us, but it might be smart to find a few more along the way," Peter reported succinctly. The Major's voice crackled over the radio, acknowledged Peter. "I'll send my men with trucks to your location. They'll pick up any additional vehicles they find along the way. We'll do our best to make room for everything and everyone." "Good. We'll be ready for your guys," Peter replied, his mind already focused on the logistics of transporting both survivors and supplies back to the camp. After the conversation with the Major, Peter returned to the warehouse. Inside, MJ efficiently coordinated the survivors, directing them to gather their belongings and pack essentials. The atmosphere was one of organized urgency as everyone worked to ensure a swift evacuation. Half an hour later, the distant hum of engines echoed down the highway. A large convoy of military trucks, accompanied by a few box trucks and 18-wheelers, pulled into the warehouse. The rescued civilians stared in awe as soldiers in uniform disembarked, their disciplined salutes directed at Peter. Waving off the formalities, Peter approached the soldiers, issuing orders with the ease of someone accustomed to leadership. "All right, everyone, we need to load these trucks before nightfall. Let's get it done efficiently. Move quickly and be thorough." The soldiers, recognizing Peter's authority, lined the trucks up with the loading bay and swiftly went to work. Crates and boxes of supplies were efficiently transferred from the warehouse to the trucks, creating a seamless operation under Peter's guidance. The rescued civilians watched as their once considered belongings were loaded onto military vehicles. While the sight stirred mixed emotions, they reassured themselves that this was a small price to pay for safety and protection. Living under military care might restrict their access to the supplies, but it also guaranteed a level of security they hadn't known since the outbreak began. As the loading continued, Peter approached the civilians, offering a few words of reassurance. "The military camp is a safe place, which I plan to expand in the coming days. And since you'll be coming with us, we'll make sure you have what you need, so don't worry about food and water." Their anxiety eased. The survivors continued to watch as their former sanctuary transformed into a military operation. The military trucks were quickly filled, and the soldiers stood ready for further instructions. "All right, everyone, trucks are loaded. We're heading back to camp," Peter announced, his authoritative tone guiding the group toward the waiting military convoy, where they were packed into some less crowded truck. Throughout the whole operation, Joel and Tommy watched Peter take charge with a sense of awe and respect. They were initially skeptical about his plans to take over the hospital camp and expand into clearing the city. But after seeing him work today, they started to realize that it was actually possible. At first, they just thought that Peter was a reliable guy with a good trigger finger and even better aim. But after seeing him fight both here and at the hospital, they began to realize that he was almost superhuman. And now, not only was his strength and abilities incredible, but so was his leadership ability. Tommy turned to his brother. "We might have hit the jackpot when we ran into him." Joel couldn't help but nod in agreement. "Yeah, I feel like we'd be in a much worse situation right now if we didn't meet." With a renewed sense of hope, everyone boarded their designated transport, leaving behind the warehouse that had been completely looted. Thankfully, this warehouse didn't hold any of the fungus-riddled foods, so they really looted everything inside. Even the metal shelves and forklifts were taken to help with the unloading and storage at the hospital. Not even the paperwork was left behind, as Peter took all of it in order to locate even more warehouses. After all, he planned to take in as many people as possible, so they'd need all the food they can get before he can work on farming their own food. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the desolate landscape, the convoy of trucks, led by Peter's police SUV with MJ in the passenger seat, arrived at the hospital. The Major had anticipated their return, and the gates were already wide open as soldiers rushed out, securing the area. The trucks pulled into the hospital's parking lot one by one. It was a tight fit, but the soldiers directed each vehicle efficiently, creating an organized chaos as they maneuvered through the limited space. The gates were promptly closed behind them, sealing the hospital grounds. A collective sigh of relief echoed among the civilians, soldiers, patients, and hospital staff as the trucks were unloaded. The sight of the food supplies being pulled out brought smiles to their faces. Some couldn't help but shed tears, realizing that the arrival of Peter and his group ensured they wouldn't face starvation in the coming days. Meanwhile, the rescued civilians disembarked from the trucks, their expressions not mirroring the joy of the hospital inhabitants. The journey had peeled away the veil of ignorance that had shrouded them within the warehouse. The reality outside was a harsh slap to the face: barren roads, scattered cars, and streets teeming with the undead. The once idealized vision of a military camp as a haven clashed with the grim reality of barricades and sandbags around a lone hospital. As they surveyed their surroundings, the civilians couldn't help but feel as though they expected more, perhaps a larger military presence or a bigger, more fortified camp. The disappointment lingered, even though they acknowledged the improvement compared to the warehouse. At least they now had protection. But of course, this new protection came at a cost, a loss of control and ownership over their food. Yet, there was solace in the fact that Peter, the man who had proven his capability, was now their protector alongside the many military men and women. Throughout the night, soldiers worked tirelessly to store the newly acquired food in the hospital's facilities. Meanwhile, a makeshift celebration unfolded. Fires were lit outside the hospital, and a large communal meal was prepared, bringing a sense of unity and gratitude among the hospital staff, patients, soldiers, and the recently arrived survivors. As laughter and conversation filled the air, Peter found a moment of solitude to reflect on the next task at hand. Fort Benning, a military installation nearby, held the key to solidifying his control over the camp. Tomorrow, he would raid and loot the place dry. I hope they have some nice toys for me inside, Peter thought, imagining his town surrounded by tanks and machine gun-mounted Hummers. They might even have missile launchers. Though he probably wouldn't ever use them, having some missiles at his disposal would be cool. But most of all, Peter hoped that there would be more soldiers there, whom he could recruit into his town. After Rick left in search of his family, it didn't take him long to arrive at his house, which was eerily empty compared to how he remembered it. Clothes and other items were scattered around, and a few mangled bodies lay in the otherwise desolate space. Rick's heart sank at the sight, but soon realized that they didn't belong to his family. With a sense of desperate determination, Rick shook off the initial shock and started searching again. As he combed through the neighborhood, a few doors down, he stumbled upon Morgan Jones and his family, who had been silently hiding from the relentless threat of the undead. Though the initial interaction with Morgan was marked by a certain guarded hostility, Rick's urgency to find his family prevailed. After explaining his situation, Morgan begrudgingly shared what information he had. Most people had fled to Atlanta, chasing rumors about a camp offering safety. It was a beacon of hope in a world overrun by chaos, but the details were scarce. Rick absorbed this fragment of information, grateful for even the slightest lead. He didn't overstay his welcome, understanding the tense dynamics between the surviving family and himself. With a nod of gratitude, Rick prepared to leave, setting his sights on Atlanta. But before he left, Rick gave the family some advice. There's a military camp over at the hospital. They seem to be taking in survivors. I plan to come back and join them after I find my family, and you should do the same. After that, he turned, hopped in his car, and drove off. The road stretched ahead, a path fraught with uncertainties and dangers. Yet, Rick pushed forward, fueled by the flickering hope of finding his family amid the ruins of the once familiar world. After a comfortable night's sleep in their hospital room turned bedroom, Peter awoke to the sun beaming into the room, casting a warm glow on the space. MJ, his wife, lay cuddled up next to him, her cute sleeping face adorned with a peaceful expression. It was still their honeymoon, so the previous night had been filled with fiery passion and carnal pleasures. After all, this was their first night alone in a room together since they started their journey. Every other night was spent with Joel, Tommy, and Sarah somewhere in the vicinity. Peter couldn't help but smile as he admired MJ's serene sleeping face, even as she drooled on his chest. So cute! He could spend hours just looking at his wife sleeping, spit leaking out of her mouth. As MJ stirred awake, Peter gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Good morning, beautiful," he whispered, eliciting a sleepy smile from his wife. The responsibilities awaiting them outside the confines of their private room were momentarily forgotten as they shared a quiet, affectionate moment. However, duty called, and after a while, Peter got straight to work. Today was the day to raid Fort Benning, and he intended to leave nothing behind. The military base held the promise of valuable resources, weapons, and perhaps more soldiers to join their cause. Time was of the essence, and Peter was determined to clear out the entire facility in a single day. After getting ready, Peter assembled his team for the mission. With MJ at his side, along with Tommy and Joel, they made their way downstairs and out of the hospital. Once again, Michonne would stay behind to look after Andre and Sarah. Since she has reliable people around her now, she didn't need to go out and leave her son behind anymore. Something that should have been the case from the beginning. She seems much happier than she looked in the show, Peter thought as he saw Michonne feeding her son his breakfast. After exchanging some words with Michonne, the group prepared to leave, but as they stepped outside, they found a surprising scene. What the? The Major, recognizing Peter's capabilities and leadership, had not only given his approval but also mobilized a significant number of soldiers to join the cause. Outside the hospital walls, a convoy of military Hummers and trucks lined up, soldiers in uniform prepared for the mission. More than 100 volunteers, armed and ready, offered their services to Peter. The Major himself approached, a nod of approval evident in his expression. These soldiers offered to help with the Fort Benning operation. They are under your command if you'll accept them, Major Lewis stated with a salute, acknowledging Peter as a higher authority than himself. Even though Peter's side of the deal wasn't fully completed, he had already made a huge impact on all of the soldiers, their commander included. Peter, though surprised by the overwhelming support, didn't hesitate. "I appreciate your trust. Let's get this done. They're all yours." The Major nodded his head. "I'll be waiting to hear the good news. All of the trucks from yesterday have been emptied and refueled. As soon as you radio in, I'll send them over for transport." After a brief talk, the convoy set out with Peter and his group leading the way in his police SUV, followed by the military vehicles. The hum of engines and the synchronized movements of the convoy conveyed a sense of purpose and determination. The soldiers, inspired by Peter's previous displays of prowess, were eager to follow his lead. As they drove toward Fort Benning, leaving the town and speeding down the highway, the once daunting prospect now seemed conquerable. After hours of navigating the barren highways, Peter and his convoy of soldiers eventually reached Fort Benning. The sprawling military base, once a symbol of security, loomed ahead. A sign proudly declared, "Welcome to Fort Benning," a stark contrast to the grim reality they were about to face. The open layout of the base, lacking the usual gated structure, was a testament to its previous functionality. However, the current state of the world demanded gated defenses. Approaching the entrance, the sight that greeted Peter was expected. The makeshift gates, which must have been constructed after the outbreak, were partially open, and a small horde of zombies lingered nearby. It was evident that the base had fallen to the infected. The absence of a secured perimeter around the huge complex meant that the zombies had found their way in through alternative routes. Peter couldn't help but think about the missed opportunity, which was the failure to gate off the entire base when the outbreak began. If they gated this place off, it would have made a good base instead of the town, Peter thought. Although the town wasn't gated either, he had plans to make one once it was cleared out. As the convoy turned into the entrance, Peter and the others noticed the zombies scattered around, many of which were former soldiers still in uniform. Radioing to the soldiers, Peter instructed them to stop and hold their fire. Exiting his police SUV, he unsheathed Michonne's sword and swiftly moved towards the small horde. Beheading each zombie with precise strikes, Peter demonstrated a mastery over the sword that continued to impress the soldiers that followed him. After dispatching the initial group, Peter returned to his vehicle. The gates were partially open, offering a narrow passage for the convoy to proceed. Leading the way, he guided the vehicles into the base. As they advanced, Peter remained vigilant, eyes scanning for signs of potential threats. He was acutely aware that a multitude of dangers could lie within the seemingly deserted Fort Benning. Driving down the lengthy road leading into the base, Peter couldn't shake the thought that this world's Fort Benning had fallen faster than its television counterpart. The rapid, relentless nature of the zombies in this combination of worlds had likely played a decisive role. After all, these infected were not the traditional slow-moving walkers but agile, fast, and unrelenting, creating an insurmountable wave that overwhelmed defenses. As they navigated deeper into the base, Peter kept a watchful eye, searching for signs of landmines or any automated security systems that might have been installed. The military's extensive resources often included such protective measures, and Peter was determined not to allow his men to fall victim to them. Thankfully, the immediate vicinity seemed to be free of landmines or any automated defenses. The tension in the air slightly eased, but their guard remained up as they continued their approach. Arriving at the end of the road, the convoy entered the massive campus-like complex that was Fort Benning. Large buildings sprawled across the area, interspersed with open fields presumably used for training exercises. Fort Benning, being a prominent military installation, included large barracks for soldiers, administrative buildings for command operations, training grounds for drills, and specialized facilities for various purposes. It was huge, like a giant university campus. Sadly, the once meticulously organized and disciplined army base now bore the chaotic scars of the recent outbreak. Barricades and sandbags haphazardly blocked pathways, and remnants of vehicles hinted at the hurried attempts to control the situation. Infected soldiers wandered aimlessly or clustered in random hordes. The once disciplined army base had succumbed to the relentless onslaught of the undead. In a cruel twist of fate, those who once defended the nation were now a huge threat to its inhabitants. Upon reaching the first group of buildings, a horde of around 100 zombies turned their attention toward the approaching convoy. Peter assumed command, swiftly issuing orders over the radio. "Listen up, I want each of you to head to the closest building and climb on top," he directed. "Only open fire when you're all out of reach of the infected. I'll draw them away and start thinning the herd in the meantime." Without hesitation, the soldiers mobilized. Peter, armed with Michonne's sword, dashed toward the approaching horde, skillfully slicing through the zombies as he deftly maneuvered among them. The soldiers swiftly drove up to the nearest building, using their vehicles as makeshift platforms and some teamwork to climb onto the roof. As the soldiers ascended, they opened fire on the horde of zombies, careful not to hit Peter, who danced among the undead with lethal precision. The rhythmic boom of gunfire echoed through the base as the soldiers expertly picked off the infected from their elevated positions. However, the distant sounds of gunfire acted as a beacon, drawing more zombies from the vast expanse of Fort Benning toward the source of the noise. It wasn't long before additional hordes closed in on the besieged area, presenting a relentless onslaught. Deep within the basement of a building across the fort, a large group of soldiers who had been hiding away from the infected heard the gunshot. Hope sparked in their eyes, replacing the despair that had consumed them during their confinement. These soldiers were starving, isolated, and unsure of the outside world, but the sound of gunshots served as a lifeline, a glimmer of hope they had thought lost. Similar scenarios played out across the base as pockets of survivors, hidden away in different sections, heard the gunfire and dared to dream of rescue. The unexpected arrival of Peter and his forces breathed life into their fading hopes. The relentless battle against the zombie horde persisted for hours as Peter, armed with Michonne's sword, skillfully carved through the undead. The sound of gunfire echoed through Fort Benning, acting as a siren call that drew more zombies to the scene. The soldiers, safe on the roof, fired constantly. Each shot was a step toward reclaiming the military base. Gradually, after hours, the horde thinned, and the constant stream of zombies dwindled to a trickle. The base floor was now littered with the bodies of the fallen infected, a testament to the relentless effort of Peter and his forces. Hundreds, if not thousands, of zombies had met their demise. Peter observed the aftermath, confident that they had eradicated the majority of the infected within the base. Satisfied with the progress, Peter sheathed Michonne's sword and took charge once again. Good work, everyone. The majority of the infected are down, but we're not finished yet. Get down from there and prepare to sweep the grounds. We need to ensure every last straggler is taken care of. As the soldiers descended from their vantage point, they regrouped with Peter. The major part of the mission was accomplished. The undead threat was significantly neutralized. Now, the focus shifted to clearing the base building by building and field by field. Peter and MJ followed at a relaxed pace, overseeing the ongoing operation. In nearly every building, they discovered survivors. Groups of 2 to 10 people huddled together, grateful for the rescue and the promise of sustenance. Larger groups, ranging from 30 to 50 individuals, emerged from various corners of the base. The survivors were a mix of military personnel and civilians who had sought refuge within Fort Benning. By the time they finished clearing the base, they had encountered around 200 survivors. Many were soldiers, and among them, a few held high ranks, including a colonel. While the immediate relief of being rescued was palpable, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that these high-ranking people would cause him trouble. After all, they've grown used to being in a position of power, so following Peter, a man who isn't from the military, will most likely feel demeaning. Setting aside thoughts of potential future issues, Peter and his team transitioned to the next phase. Looting. The rewards were plentiful. Ammunition of all calibers, military-grade weaponry, uniforms, vehicles, explosives, missile launchers, and other priceless treasures and needed supplies were among the growing list of loot. Peter's eyes widened in sheer disbelief and delight as he surveyed the arsenal before him. It was a pile of riches that exceeded his wildest expectations. The soldiers watched as Peter's excitement bubbled over into a maniacal laugh, echoing through the cavernous space. The sight left some of them questioning whether they were following the right leader. However, before uncertainty could take root, MJ stepped forward, her expression exasperated. With a swift motion, she delivered a resounding slap to the back of Peter's head, halting his laughter abruptly. Peter held his head, eyeing MJ with a look of betrayal. "What the hell was that for?" MJ rolled her eyes. "You're scaring the soldiers." The soldiers themselves, witnessing this unexpected act, couldn't help but laugh. Peter might be a bit odd at times, but at least he isn't boring. After MJ swiftly quelled Peter's maniacal laughter, the reality of their situation demanded attention. Peter radioed Major Lewis, instructing him to send the transport for the loot. Even though the Major knew Peter would succeed after witnessing his power and ability, he still couldn't help but feel both shocked and impressed. The problems that he toiled over for days were solved by Peter in only 24 hours. At this point, he didn't mind keeping his end of the deal. After all, why wouldn't he want to follow Peter? He's brought their camp nothing but success. Within a few hours, a convoy of 18-wheelers, box trucks, and military transport vehicles rumbled onto the scene. And just like before, Peter took charge, efficiently organizing the loading process. As the soldiers diligently loaded the trucks with the spoils of their conquest, Peter's enhanced hearing picked up whispers among the newly rescued high-ranking officers. The colonel, highest in rank among them, seemed to be their focal point of discussion. Their discontent was palpable, questioning Peter's authority and openly voicing the belief that the colonel should be leading the operation. One officer remarked, "Who is this guy anyway? How did he end up in charge of us? We're soldiers, not his personal henchmen." The murmurs of agreement spread, fueled by their ego and desire for the familiarity of military hierarchy. Peter, overhearing their conversation from afar, sighed in annoyance. He knew that the power dynamic would become an issue sooner or later. Ignorant, these officers saw an opportunity to reclaim their sense of authority. But for now, Peter dismissed their discontent, focusing on securing the loot. He had neither the time nor patience to engage in a power struggle with these idiots right now. "I'll find a way to take care of them later," Peter thought, a dangerous glint in his eyes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the looted Fort Benning, the loading process neared completion. Boxes of ammunition, crates of weapons, and various military supplies were packed into the trucks. They took every last speck of loot without leaving behind a single crumb. With a final glance at the secured loot, Peter decided it was time to leave. The convoy, now laden with the spoils of their raid, rumbled to life, setting off out of the base and onto the highway. But, now that he had so many vehicles, Peter decided to ride back home in style. So, instead of his familiar police SUV, Peter chose to ride atop one of the tanks they had just acquired. As they joined the endless line of vehicles on the highway, Peter and MJ found a comfortable spot on the tank's surface. Wrapped in each other's arms, they marveled at the night sky, unobstructed by the light pollution that once drowned out the stars. The apocalypse had its silver linings, and the brilliant night sky was one of them. The highway stretched before them, a caravan of military vehicles heading back to the hospital. Riding on top of a tank, Peter and MJ felt a sense of triumph. They had achieved a significant victory, acquiring not only supplies but also a symbol of authority, a line of tanks and other formidable military vehicles that roared down the highway. The journey home provided a rare moment of peace. The soldiers, tired but satisfied, reveled in the success of their mission. Peter couldn't help but appreciate the unity forged in the face of adversity. Yet, underneath the stars and the quiet hum of engines, Peter remained mindful of the brewing discontent among the high-ranking officers. Peter knew that managing egos would be a challenge, but it wasn't a challenge he intended to face head-on. "I'll give them a chance to calm down and become a part of the group, but if they try anything, then I'll have to just get rid of them." Thoughts of killing them off tonight whilst everyone slept swirled around Peter's mind, but in the end he decided against it. Technically, they haven't done anything, so he'll give them one chance, and one chance only. After a long and triumphant drive back, the convoy, laden with loot and all sorts of military vehicles, finally returned to the hospital. The sight of the impressive caravan surprised everyone inside the camp, the size of the loot forcing them to park a substantial portion of the convoy outside the hospital. Peter, unperturbed, had already planned to expand the camp to encompass the entire town, rendering the parking situation a minor inconvenience. As everyone disembarked, the camp welcomed them with cheers and applause. The people, already grateful for Peter's previous feats, were now astounded by the sheer abundance of supplies and weapons he had brought back. Peter, their newfound hero, wasn't a stranger to people's admiration. He just went straight to directing the unloading process with the efficiency of a seasoned commander. The soldiers, tired but proud, hurried to unload, ready to join the rest of the camp's residents in the celebration. Cookfires were lit for the second day in a row, and the smell of cooked food wafted through the air, a stark contrast to the usual somber atmosphere of survival they were forced to live before Peter's arrival. Amidst the festivities, Peter couldn't help but notice the colonel and his faction pulling Major Lewis aside for a private conversation. The secretive huddle raised suspicion, prompting MJ to look towards Peter with a raised brow. "When are you planning on dealing with those ungrateful rats? They've been conspiring ever since we saved them." With an uncaring shrug, Peter replied, "I'm just giving them a chance to change their mind. Either see reason or make a move. The second that they so much as plan anything against us, I'll make them disappear." His superhuman hearing was his advantage. They could conspire all they wanted, but in the end, they wouldn't be able to do anything. Hours later, after the celebration had mellowed and everyone was headed to bed, the Major approached Peter with a hesitant, almost awkward, look on his face. Before the Major could voice his concerns, Peter preemptively asked, "Is this about your meeting with the Colonel and his men?" Exclamation point. The Major's eyes widened in surprise, confirming Peter's intuition. "Why yes, they wanted to know more about you and made it pretty clear that they want to take over." "Did they?" Peter muttered, his eyes flashing dangerously, scaring the poor Major. "And how do you feel about that?" he asks, almost indifferently. The major, quick to assert his loyalty, emphatically responded, "No way. I'm with you. I made a deal and I'm a man of my word. You have my loyalty, I swear." Peter nodded, acknowledging the major's integrity. Before heading to his room, Peter casually inquired, "Did they specifically ask for your help?" The major calmed a bit before admitting, "No, they left after realizing that I wasn't sympathetic to their cause. But they've been talking to my men throughout the night, and many of them have been reporting similar conversations back to me. They seem to be recruiting." "I see." Peter, with a hint of ominous certainty, assured him, "Don't worry about the colonel and his group. They'll be gone before morning." With a quick pat on the major's shoulder, Peter continued on to his room. The implication of what would happen to the troublemakers hung heavily in the air. Fear flickered in the major's eyes as he watched his new leader leave, grateful that his allegiance to Peter had spared him from the fate that awaited the dissenting officers. As morning dawned on the camp, the usual hustle and bustle of post-apocalyptic life resumed. However, it didn't take long for a sense of eerie realization to settle in. The high-ranking officers rescued from Fort Benning were nowhere to be found. Whispers echoed through the camp as people what happened or where they went. Their belongings were gone, and it seemed as if they had vanished into thin air. The major, his eyes reflecting a mix of awe and fear, couldn't help but steal glances at Peter. The mysterious leader had promised the officers would be gone before morning, and he had delivered. However, the major couldn't fathom how Peter accomplished such a feat, killing a group of people in a densely populated camp without detection and erasing all traces seemed implausible, yet the evidence before him suggested otherwise. Approaching Peter cautiously, the major stammered, "How did you? I mean, they're really gone. What did you do?" Peter's response was a chilling smile that sent shivers down the major's spine. "Sometimes, it's better not to ask too many questions, Major. Just know that I keep my promises." The major, fear etched across his face, nodded hesitantly. At that moment, a silent oath formed in his heart. He vowed to never cross Peter or entertain thoughts of betrayal. The power and efficiency displayed by their enigmatic leader demanded both respect and a healthy dose of fear. Unbeknownst to the major and any other suspicious parties in the camp, Peter hadn't resorted to murder in the dead of night. Instead, he simply sent the away. With a mere wave of his hand and the subtle manipulation of portals, Peter had relocated the entire group of dissidents. But Peter would allow them to think what they wanted. He observed the major's lingering fear with a sense of amusement and satisfaction. That fear would serve as a deterrent, a reminder that Peter's capabilities extended far beyond what the eye could see. Meanwhile, atop a skyscraper in Hong Kong, China, the colonel and his bewildered men awoke to a chilly morning. The towering cityscape, ravaged into a desolate landscape by the zombie outbreak, surrounded them. Confusion and realization dawned on their faces as they realized they were perched high above one of the world's most densely populated cities, which means lots of infected. The colonel, momentarily stunned, surveyed the unfamiliar skyline. The sight of millions of zombies wandering the streets below sent shivers down his spine. Questions raced through their minds as they grappled with the surreal nature of their situation. Far from the military camp they once schemed to control, they now found themselves in a much worse hell than they were rescued from. With the power-hungry nuisances now dispatched, Peter took a moment to survey the transformed camp. The soldiers, once hopeless and scared, now awaited his orders with an air of certainty and expectancy. Peter knew that consolidating their forces in preparation to clear the town was the next logical step. As the morning sun bathed the camp in a warm glow, he gathered the soldiers in a central courtyard. "Listen up, everyone!" Peter's voice, amplified by a makeshift speaker system, echoed through the camp. The soldiers, both seasoned and newly recruited, gathered around, their attention squarely on their enigmatic leader. Peter continued, "Today we expand out of the hospital and make ourselves a real home to live in. With the supplies we've acquired and the manpower we've gained, we have the means to secure this place and make it our own." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd as Peter spoke again. "The infected are predictable. They're drawn to sound, act like ravenous beasts, and are unable to climb walls if they're high enough. We're going to use that to our advantage. Stay in groups, move quietly, and utilize the high ground. Lure them out with controlled noise, and when you need to clear buildings, use small quick groups to draw them into the open. Safety in numbers, efficiency in strategy. Let's show them what we're made of." As Peter outlined the plan, he saw determination flicker in the eyes of the soldiers. They were ready to follow him into the chaos, armed with the confidence that Peter had instilled in them. The promise of reclaiming the town and turning it into a new home fueled their resolve, transforming uncertainty into purpose. With the speech concluded, the soldiers dispersed, gearing up for the daunting task ahead. Weapons were checked, ammunition loaded, and communication devices synchronized. The sound of boots and murmured conversations filled the air as the soldiers prepared for the operation. Peter, satisfied with the response, made his way to the forefront, ready to lead by example. The first step was to secure around the hospital and slowly sweep outward. Before setting off, Peter appointed a trusted group to guard the medical facility, ensuring its safety and the protection of those who would remain behind. The rest of the soldiers formed a formidable line, armed and ready to march into the infected territory. Arriving at the gate of the hospital camp, Peter gathered the soldiers for a final briefing. "Remember the plan and listen for any new commands," he reminded them. "Stay vigilant, move silently, and watch each other's backs. We've got the numbers, the firepower, and the brains. Let's take this town back." The soldiers, armed and focused, spread out through the streets as the gates swung open, immediately opening fire on the nearest infected. Under the scorching sun, the soldiers moved with precision through the streets, their footsteps echoing against the silent backdrop of the once thriving town. Peter, positioned strategically behind the group alongside MJ, directed their movements with the finesse of a seasoned commander. "Alpha Team, sweep the left side of this street. Bravo, cover the right. Keep it tight, and remember to draw as many infected as you can back to the main group," Peter commanded through a small radio device, his voice clear and authoritative. The soldiers, armed and vigilant, moved in coordinated groups, each step a testament to their training and newfound unity. The infected, drawn by the presence of the living, rushed towards the soldiers, their gruesome moans filling the air. As the soldiers encountered the first wave of infected, Peter's guidance became crucial. "Bravo Team, lure them into the open space by the grocery store. A firing squad is awaiting your arrival on the roof," he instructed, his eyes scanning the surroundings for potential threat. The soldiers, following Peter's lead, deftly executed the plan. Controlled noise drew the infected away from the narrow streets, creating a clear line of sight for the soldiers on the rooftop. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the town as the soldiers efficiently dispatched the approaching threats. Moving methodically, street by street, the soldiers encountered various challenges. Some infected lurked in dark alleyways, while others stumbled out of dilapidated buildings. Peter, using his enhanced senses, anticipated potential danger and directed the soldiers to navigate the obstacles with caution. As they reached the first set of buildings, Peter signaled a small quick-response team. "Charlie Team, clear the first floor of that apartment building. Draw them out if necessary, but be quick and efficient," he commanded. The team, armed with precision and agility, entered the building. Controlled noise and strategic movements led the infected into the open, where the awaiting firing squad swiftly neutralized the threat. Peter observed with a watchful eye, ensuring the safety of his soldiers. The progress was deliberate, the soldiers advancing with a methodical rhythm. As they cleared each street and building, the town slowly began to shake off the shackles of the infected. Peter, always a step ahead, guided them through narrow alleys and open spaces, using the environment to their advantage. MJ, standing beside Peter, couldn't help but marvel at the efficiency of the operation. "You've got this down to a science," she remarked, admiration evident in her eyes. Peter, focused on the task at hand, nodded. "It's all about understanding their patterns and using our strengths against their weaknesses. We'll fully reclaim this town by the end of the week." The soldiers, fueled by a sense of purpose and guided by Peter's leadership, pressed on. The first day's progress might have covered only a few streets and the buildings on them, but it marked a significant step toward reclaiming the town. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the cleared streets, Peter addressed the troops. "We've made good progress today. Let's head back to camp and get some rest. Tomorrow, we continue the sweep." Upon returning to the camp without a single casualty, the morale of the soldiers went up significantly. Not only did they have food and firepower, but now they had the success of a perfect operation to go along with it. As they ate, regaling the many civilians in the camp about their experience clearing the town, everyone couldn't help but smile. Some even whispered amongst one another, debating which house they'll pick to move into once the town was safe to live in. Overhearing this as well, MJ turned to Peter. "I know we won't be here for long, but we should find a nice place to live too, just in case we ever come back to visit." Peter shrugged. "Sure, I don't mind." He would leave all of that to her as he didn't really care where they lived for the short time that they would be here. After several days of relentless work and strategic maneuvering, the soldiers, under Peter's expert leadership, successfully cleared the entire town of the relentless infected. The once desolate streets now stood as a testament to their perfect teamwork. Street by street, building by building, they had systematically eradicated the threat that had plagued the town. They even found over 100 survivors, all hiding in random places throughout the town, waiting for someone to come and save them. On the third day of the operation, as they pushed deeper into the heart of the town, the soldiers stumbled upon a familiar face. Morgan Jones and his family, including his wife who hadn't met her fate as she did in the show, were shocked and frightened at first sight of the well-armed group clearing out their neighborhood. The initial fear, however, gave way to relief as they realized they were not hostile. The Jones family, it turned out, had been debating whether to join the hospital camp ever since Rick had informed them about it. Fear had kept them confined to the safety of their home, but the sight of so many soldiers efficiently clearing the area convinced them that it might be a safer bet to join the organized camp. After a brief discussion with Peter and MJ, they agreed to become part of the camp, adding to the growing number of survivors. On the last day of the operation, as the soldiers returned to Camp Victorious, they were met with a celebration that echoed through the once silent streets. Excited faces, food, and drinks were shared as everyone reveled in the accomplishment of clearing the town. It seemed as though the nightmare was finally over. However, Peter, ever pragmatic, knew there was still work to be done. As the celebratory atmosphere lingered, he gathered the attention of the crowd and stepped forward. "Listen up, everyone," Peter announced, his voice carrying through the cheering crowd. "We've done an incredible job clearing the town, but our work isn't finished. We still need to clean up the aftermath, burn every single body, and dispose of any suspicious mold. We can't risk any remnants of the infection lingering." A hush fell over the crowd as Peter continued. "Secondly, although the town is currently safe, it won't stay that way for long. We need to gate off the entire town to prevent any other infected from wandering in. This won't be an easy task, but if we work together, we can finally secure the town and Olive can move into any house you wish, as long as it hasn't already been taken." The initial excitement shifted to a more serious tone as Peter outlined the remaining task. The crowd, while understanding the necessity of the cleanup and fortification, couldn't help but feel a tinge of disappointment that their immediate dreams of returning to a semi-normal life could not yet be fulfilled. Nonetheless, the camp's resolve was not halted. They may need to do a bit more work, but they would get what they want soon enough. The celebration may have been premature, but the path to a safe and thriving town was within reach. Across the state, as everyone back in Kings County was celebrating the town's eradication of the infected, Rick Grimes drove toward a dark, infested city, passing a sign that said, "Welcome to Atlanta." The journey here wasn't the smoothest, but finally, he was one step closer to finding his family. The following day dawned with a renewed sense of purpose as the soldiers, having successfully cleared the entire town, now shifted their focus to the challenging task of gating off the area. In a meeting room at the hospital, Peter, MJ, Major Lewis, Joel, and Tommy gathered around a table adorned with maps of Georgia, the remnants of a bygone era when paper maps were still indispensable. Peter, pointing toward the east coast of the map, took the lead in the discussion. "Our next move is to raid the shipping docks," he declared. The others exchanged curious glances, prompting Peter to elaborate. "We're not just going for supplies, although that's a bonus. We need the shipping containers." Confusion lingered in the room until Peter unveiled his plan. "These containers will be the foundation of our perimeter. But thin sheeted metal won't hold against the infected, so we'll need to fill them with concrete or asphalt, reinforced with rebar if possible. It's the simplest and most efficient way to create a sturdy barrier around the town." Nods of understanding passed through the group. The idea of repurposing shipping containers not only for their original contents but also for fortifying their newfound home resonated as a practical solution. The only problem would be getting enough asphalt and concrete, as normal stores wouldn't hold that much at a time. Abandoned construction areas and storage spaces should have exactly what they need though. Joel raised a practical concern. "What about a gate?" he questioned. "How are we supposed to get in and out while keeping the infected at bay?" Peter, taking a sip from a water bottle, considered the question. "We might have to fashion our own gate or reinforce an existing one if we find something suitable while we're out. But for now, let's just focus on getting everything that we need." As he says that, Peter turns to the Major. "We'll be taking some men with us, but only around 100. While we're gone, I need you to lead another group to start burning the infected bodies that are lying all over town," he says as he turns deathly serious. "Listen to me very carefully. You need to make sure that everyone who comes into contact with these bodies are in gloves, long-sleeved clothing, and wearing respiratory masks. Do you understand?" The Major nodded his head. "Yes, sir." "Good, because I don't want to come back and find out that some brain-dead idiots got themselves infected," Peter stated before adding, "and the same goes for any fungus or mold growing around town. It needs to be burned and dealt with using extreme caution." "Don't worry, I'll lead the operation myself," the Major assured him. "We'll do everything as you said." With the expedition plan in place, as well as the clean-up plan, Peter and his usual team geared up for the journey to the shipping dock. As Peter and his team prepared for the crucial expedition to the shipping docks, inside a growing survivor camp outside of Atlanta, a different conversation unfolded. The camp, nestled in an old quarry base, had become a refuge for survivors, and as the influx of people increased, so did the strain on their dwindling supplies. In a meeting area at the center of camp, surrounded by the rugged remnants of the quarry, a group of survivors huddled to discuss the impending need for supplies. Glenn, Lori, Shane, Morales, Andrea, T-Dog, Carol, Merle, Daryl, and a few other key members comprised the group. The conversation was marked by a sense of urgency as they debated who among them would venture out to gather the necessary supplies. Morales, a calm and measured presence, spoke up, "I'm willing to go. We can't keep relying on what's left. We need more, or we'll be facing a different kind of danger." Although he was scared to leave the safety of their camp, Glenn nodded in agreement. "I can scout around, find the best places to loot. But we'll need a team, not just one person." Andrea chimed in, "I'm in. We need to do this carefully though. No unnecessary risks." T-Dog voiced his support, "I'll go too. We've got to do what we can for the camp." Merle, grinning mischievously, seemed unfazed by the collective gaze. "Well, ain't this a merry band of misfits? I'm in, but only 'cause I don't trust y'all to get it done yourselves." T-Dog raised a questioning brow. "What's that supposed to mean?" A/N. Warning. Merle is racist, sexist, and just an all-around piece of human trash. So be ready for it. I'll try to keep the truly heinous words out or censored in some way. Mainly because I don't want to get banned, or annoyed by people who don't understand that it's just his character. It means that y'all wouldn't be able to survive without me. Merle states matter-of-factly, pointing at Glenn, Andrea, Morales, and T-Dog, one by one. "Look at you? A chink, a woman, a wetback, and an eye-dash." Instantly, T-Dog jumped out of his seat and swings at Merle. "You racist douchebag." Instantly, Daryl stepped in front of his brother and took the hit, whilst everyone else held T-Dog back. Merle, seeing that his brother was punched, tried to retaliate, but Daryl did his best to restrain him. Once everyone was separated and calm again, Daryl spoke up. "I'll go too," he said as he eyed his brother, who didn't look happy. After all, someone needs to make sure he doesn't get killed or left behind. Daryl didn't trust any of these people to look out for his brother's well-being, so he would have to it himself. His brother had a knack for getting people to hate him, especially those of other races and genders. He just didn't care and let his mouth run, spewing all sorts of filth on a daily basis. Suddenly, Shane spoke up. "Maybe I should go as well?" "No." Instantly, Lori disagreed. "You're the only one who's keeping this camp together. If you leave, who knows what'll happen?" Although it wasn't as big of a deal as Lori was making it out to be, everyone couldn't help but agree that Shane was the one keeping this camp together. As a former sheriff's deputy, he held a position of authority among the many survivors. Without him, things may spiral out of control. Reluctantly, Shane agreed that he should stay. "All right, then it's settled. Glenn, T-Dog, Morales, Merle, Daryl, and Andrea will go out for supplies. Remember, don't go deep into the city. Only search the outskirts." As they geared up for their journey, T-Dog took on a leadership role. "We'll need to be quick and efficient. Hit supermarkets, houses, anywhere that might have food. No unnecessary risk. Stay together, and we should be back before anyone misses us." Soon enough, the group left the quarry camp, venturing into the uncertain landscape surrounding Atlanta. The importance of their mission weighed heavily on their shoulders, knowing that the survival of the camp depended on the success of their looting expedition. As the quarry group ventured into the outskirts of Atlanta, their mission to gather supplies took an unexpected turn. Glenn, T-Dog, Morales, Merle, Daryl, and Andrea moved cautiously through the eerily silent streets, their eyes scanning for any signs of useful loot. The city, once bustling with life, now lay in ruins, a haunting reminder of the world they had lost. As they approached a supermarket, their hopes of finding much-needed provisions were high. The shattered glass doors creaked as Glenn cautiously pushed them open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The group spread out, scavenging for food, water, and any other essentials they could find. Suddenly, the stillness of the air was shattered by the sound of multiple guns cocking. Panic set in as the group realized they were not alone. Stepping out of the shadows, a group of unfamiliar survivors emerged with hostility in their eyes. A tense standoff unfolded as both groups assessed the threat, weapons aimed at one another. A burly man, leader of the hostile survivors, sneered at them. "Thought you could just stroll in and take whatever you want, huh?" He brandished his weapon menacingly, and tensions escalated. Merle, ever confrontational, shot back with a smirk. Well, looks like we got ourselves a welcoming committee. Ain't that nice? Before words could escalate into more violence, a gunshot rang out, hitting Merle in the arm. Arg! Bastard! Chaos erupted as the quarry group sought cover, retreating into the supermarket. The hostile survivors continued to fire in their direction, but soon retreated as they saw a horde running over. Inside the building, the wounded Merle gritted his teeth. Those sons of bitches are gonna pay for that. T-Dog, scanning their surroundings, noticed a swarm of infected drawn by the commotion. We need to find a way out of here before those things reach us. As the infected closed in, the quarry group made a frantic dash through the market, searching for an escape route. A door at the back led them to a narrow alley, but the moans of the infected echoed around them. In a desperate move, they entered an abandoned building, hoping to evade both the hostile survivors and the approaching infected. With the infected now swarming the area, the quarry group found themselves trapped inside the building. The once silent streets were filled with the guttural sounds of the undead. Meanwhile, only a few blocks away, Rick, who had just arrived the previous night, heard the gunfire. Suspicious, he stealthily made his way towards the source, wondering if his family might be nearby. As he approached the supermarket, Rick spotted the quarry group as they holed themselves up inside the building, locking the door behind them. The tense situation had drawn the attention of the infected, making the environment even more perilous. Rick, assessing the situation, considered his options. The unknown group was trapped, and the infected wouldn't just leave, not after seeing some tasty food enter the building. They might know where Lori and Carl are, Rick thought as he decided to help them. The only question was, how would he do so? On the East Coast, hours away from Atlanta, Peter, unaware of the situation Rick's found himself in, just finished clearing a dockyard, filled with hundreds of shipping containers. With the help of around 100 armed soldiers, they were able to clear the place in less than an hour. Now, all they had to do was sort through the containers and transport everything back. As Peter sat back and watched his men do the dirty work, he could help but think, maybe I should start working on a cure? Possibly an anti-fungus gas or smoke to clear out large areas, and some sort of vaccine for survivors. After all, he didn't plan to stay here much longer. Once the town was secured and Rick returned with everyone, it would be time for them to head off to the next universe. Rick carefully observed the swarm of infected surrounding the building where the quarry group had taken refuge. He knew he needed a distraction to lure the zombies away, creating an opportunity for the trapped survivors to escape. Spotting a high-end car nearby, which should have an alarm, Rick decided to use it to his advantage. He stealthily approached the vehicle, but didn't get too close, making sure not to draw attention to himself. With a swift and practiced hand, he took his old cell phone, which didn't work anymore, and threw it. Seconds later, the car's window was smashed open, triggering the alarm. The loud, blaring sound echoed through the desolate streets, immediately catching the attention of the nearby infected. As the zombies turned towards the noise, Rick dashed back into cover, waiting for the infected to pass. And once they did, he peeked his head up and looked where the quarry group was hiding. Seeing them through one of his windows, watching the zombies run off in confusion, he gestured for them to stay low and quiet while they leave. Of course, they were surprised to see him, but soon realized that it was him who triggered the alarm. Once the horde moved down the street, Rick continued drawing them away. He strategically moved through the alleyways, setting off car alarms and creating a trail of noise that led the infected far away from the trapped survivors. The groans and shuffles of the undead grew fainter as Rick lured them further from the building. After ensuring a safe distance, Rick returned and signaled for the quarry group to cautiously make their way out. The survivors emerged cautiously, eyeing Rick with a mix of relief, gratitude, and a small bit of suspicion. After all, they didn't know him. "Thanks for the save," Glenn said, much more welcoming than the rest of his group. Rick nodded, scanning their faces. "You folks from around here? You seen a woman and a boy, maybe 10 years old?" T-Dog stepped forward, his demeanor welcoming but wary. "Not around here, no." Glenn thought for a moment before speaking. "We have a camp outside the city though, so maybe they're there?" Each member of his group turned to him, betrayed looks written all over their faces. "Don't tell him that. You dash!" Merle exclaimed, but before he could finish, Daryl reached over and covers his mouth. Rick turned to look in the direction the zombies were in. "Maybe we should get out of here before your friend calls all of the infected back." As they rushed away, hearing the groans and footsteps of infected following after them, T-Dog couldn't help but think of tripping Merle and leaving his racist ass behind. But one look at Daryl, and he gave up on that idea. Meanwhile, back at the dockyard on the East Coast, Peter oversaw the meticulous process of sorting through shipping containers. The soldiers worked diligently, unloading supplies and inspecting each container for potential resources. In the midst of the organized chaos, Peter's mind raced with thoughts of a potential cure. He mulled over the idea of developing anti-fungus measures and vaccines, recognizing the urgency of addressing the broader issues at hand. While his men continued the heavy lifting, Peter decided to take a moment to look over some of his map. Wasn't there a CDC in Atlanta? After looking for a while, Peter found a map that marked out key locations, and one of those locations was a CDC building. The CDC, or Center for Disease Control, is responsible for protecting public health and safety by providing information to enhance health decisions. It also houses some of the world's deadliest and rarest infectious diseases, such as smallpox. If this facility is the same as the show, then it should have exactly what I need to make the cure, Peter thought. Of course, Peter could and would use magic to help expedite the process, but he'll still need some equipment. After all, the people who live here will need to know how to produce the cure once he leaves. As the soldiers wrapped up their tasks at the dockyard, the convoy set out on the journey back to King County. Each truck carried at least one shipping container filled with valuable loot, evidence of a successful operation. Peter, seated in the lead truck with MJ by his side, grabbed the radio transmitter. "All right, everyone, great job back there. We've got what we need to start fortifying the town," Peter's voice echoed through the convoy's radios. "But sadly, MJ and I will be breaking off from the convoy at the halfway point to King County. We have an errand to run." Joel's voice crackled over the radio, curious and concerned. "Why the split?" Peter glanced at MJ, who looked just as curious, then back at the road. "I spotted a CDC building on one of the maps. I'm heading there to see if there's anyone left inside. Maybe they've been working on a vaccine or cure. Either way, their equipment will come in handy later on. We can't ignore a potential resource like that." There was a brief pause before Joel responded. "CDC, huh? Do you want us to come along?" "No," Peter replied. "We'll be fine, Joel. Just keep the convoy moving and make sure everything gets unloaded smoothly." An hour into the drive, with King County now behind them, Peter decided to break off from the convoy and head north toward Atlanta. Joel watched as Peter's military Hummer broke off from the convoy. "Peter, if you find anything, let us know. We'll be here working on fortifying the town." "Will do," Peter radioed back. "Stay safe out there." MJ looked over at Peter, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "So, the CDC building? What are you hoping to find there?" Peter navigated the car with practiced ease, explaining his thought process. "Since we'll be leaving soon, I want to make a vaccine and some things to leave behind to help everyone when we go." MJ nodded in understanding. "Good idea." She smiled happily. "I've actually been feeling kind of guilty about not helping more than we could, so this is a relief." Peter glanced at her, surprised. "Don't feel guilty. It's not our job to save every single person in the multiverse. We've already helped far more than you realize. Without us, a lot of people would be dead right now." MJ nodded her head, convinced. "Yeah, I guess you're right. They might not have gone above and beyond in this universe, as they usually would in their own, but they've saved a lot of people along their journey. And they would continue to save many more." Arriving at the quarry, Rick hitched a ride with the group he saved, hoping to find his family among the survivors. As he stepped out of the car, he immediately felt the weight of harsh, skeptical gazes. The camp had been struggling with limited supplies, and now, with the unexpected addition of another mouth to feed, the atmosphere grew tense. The group he rescued, grateful for their lives but aware of the predicament they were in, tried to blend into the background. Glenn, T-Dog, Morales, and Andrea exchanged uneasy glances, understanding the difficult position they had unknowingly put the quarry survivors in. Meanwhile, Merle and Daryl didn't seem to care and simply walked off. Worse still, the returning group only brought back a few backpacks filled with food. It was clear that this meager amount wouldn't be sufficient to sustain everyone in the camp for even a single meal. The reality of the situation hit hard, casting a shadow over the camp's already precarious situation. Ignoring the judgmental stares, Rick scanned the faces of the survivors, searching for the familiar features of his family. Pacing through the camp, it felt like an eternity as he scoured the area. Just as Rick was about to give up, a blur ran past the corner of his vision, prompting him to turn his head. There, Carl, his young son, was running around near a stream with a group of other children. Relief washed over Rick as he saw his son alive and seemingly well. It was a moment of pure joy amid the surrounding tension. Rick couldn't help but smile, the ache in his heart momentarily easing. However, the blissful reunion was short-lived. As he approached the area where Carl played, a sound caught his attention. The shuffling of fabric from a nearby tent accompanied by the occasional grunt. Curiosity piqued, Rick peered into the tent, only for his eyes to widen at the unexpected sight within. There, in an intimate moment that shattered the brief happiness he'd found, he witnessed his wife, Lori, and his best friend, Shane, locked in a heated kiss, tearing each other's clothes off. A/N. Sorry brother, but it's best you know now. Shock and disbelief froze Rick in place. A mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, and heartbreak all flooded Rick's mind. He stood there, a silent witness to a moment that shattered the illusion of normalcy in the wake of the apocalypse. The weight of the world seemed to suddenly press down on him, leaving him dumbfounded. He just stood there in shock, watching as his wife passionately mounted his best friend, the two people he trusted most in the entire world locked in a lover's embrace. As the reality of the situation sank in, Rick's emotions took control as he reached for his belt and pulled out his pistol. "You bastard!" As Rick stood at the entrance of the tent, his gun drawn, the scene before him unfolded like a twisted revelation. Shane and Lori, caught in the act of betrayal, jumped apart in shock. "Ah, Rick!" she exclaimed in shock. Lori hastily covered herself with a blanket, her face flushing with embarrassment and guilt. Both Shane and Lori believed Rick to be either dead or still trapped inside the hospital with the military, so his unexpected appearance was a jolt to their senses. Lori, who had convinced herself that Rick was lost, stood frozen, at a loss for words. Shane, realizing the gravity of the situation, attempted to explain, "Whoa, put the gun down, Rick. It's not what you think, I swear." He thought could talk Rick down before the situation escalated. However, Rick remained unyielding, the gun steady in his hand, his eyes reflecting a storm of emotions. "It's not what I think? Really, Shane? I know what I saw. You and my wife were just tearing each other clothes off and—" He froze for a moment, unable to continue that sentence. "We both know that this isn't some misunderstanding, so don't you dare lie to me. Rick, it's really not what you think. Just put down the gun and give me a minute to explain, please." Shane stammered, attempting to rationalize his actions. But Rick, fueled by a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak, wasn't ready to lower the weapon or believe a single word from his former best friend. Meanwhile, the unfolding drama didn't go unnoticed. The survivors, drawn by the commotion, surrounded the area, shocked to see the new arrival, Rick, holding a gun on Shane and Lori. But what shocked them even more was the revelation that Lori was Rick's wife. As the adults of the camp began to piece together the patterns of Shane and Lori's disappearances, realization dawned they were secret lovers, hiding their illicit relationship from the rest of the group. Amidst the tense atmosphere, Shane began to beg for his life, admiring to everything, "Look, you're right, okay? We were doing exactly what you think. Just please put the gun down, alright? Killing me or Lori won't solve anything. You'll only regret killing your best friend and the mother of your child." Seeing Rick hesitate for a moment, Lori joined him, pleading with her husband not to kill Shane. "Rick, put the gun down, please." However, rather than appease Rick, this plea only intensified his disgust. He had hoped for some semblance of remorse or an explanation that painted Shane as the true villain, but Lori's actions shattered those expectations. "I trusted you," Rick muttered, his voice laced with betrayal. And just as he was about to lower his gun, unable to kill his best friend, Shane suddenly moved, reaching for something under a nearby blanket. Exclamation point. Seeing this, Rick didn't hesitate anymore and pulled the trigger, the gunshot echoing through the camp. The bullet found its mark, hitting Shane square in the forehead. Blood sprayed out, coating the inside of the tent as Lori screamed in horror at the brutal sight. The onlooking crowd stood in stunned silence. Some among them, particularly the men, saw Shane's demise as fitting punishment for his transgressions. After all, in a world where trust was a rare commodity, betrayal had severe consequences. With Shane's lifeless body now crumpled in the tent, Rick turned his gaze toward his distraught wife. For a moment, it seemed as if Lori would be the next target. The crowd held its breath, anticipating the unfolding tragedy. However, to their surprise, Rick lowered his gun and tucked it away into his holster. Turning away from Lori, Rick addressed her with a mixture of betrayal and disgust. "I'm not going to shoot you. I won't take Carl's mother away from him," he declared, looking his wife in the eyes. "But you and me? We're done. I want a divorce." Lori, sprawled amidst the remnants of her shattered life, felt nothing but guilt. The weight of her actions, the betrayal of her vows, and the consequences of her choices sank in, leaving her to grapple with the consequences of her infidelity. Moments after Rick lowered his gun, a group from the surrounding crowd ran forward and snatched it from his hand. He didn't resist, his mind far too preoccupied with everything that's happened. Neither did he resist as they pulled him away, leaving behind the lifeless body of his best friend and a very distraught ex-wife. In the midst of the unfolding tragedy at the quarry camp, Peter and MJ navigated their way to the CDC just outside Atlanta, blissfully unaware of the chaos that had erupted nearby. Soon enough, the CDC building stood before Peter and MJ, sealed tightly with thick metal shutters that covered every entrance and window. As they approached, remnants of a military presence were evident. Abandoned cars, weaponry, barricades, and even the eerie sight of soldiers turned into zombies. Hundreds of undead soldiers wandered aimlessly in their military uniforms, a haunting testament to the catastrophic events that had unfolded just outside the safety of the sealed building's walls. Without the need for strategy or intricate plans, the duo parked their car nearby. Stepping out into the eerie silence, they were greeted by the shuffling footsteps of the zombified soldiers, their hungry gaze fixed on the newcomers. Armed with Michonne's katana, Peter took a defensive stance, while MJ wielded a metal baseball bat with a confident smirk. Finally joining Peter in the front lines of zombie killing, MJ was determined to have some fun. After all, she had been left behind to watch over the group during every other battle, and now it was her turn to take part in the action. As the undead soldiers broke into a sprint, Peter and MJ sprang into action. "Least kills makes dinner for the rest of the week," Peter declared, a smirk on his face. With a swift kick off the ground, they closed the distance between themselves and the approaching zombies. The fight ensued, a harmonious blend of Peter's expert swordplay and MJ's precise strikes with the baseball bat. Each swing and slash were executed with fluid precision, not a single drop of blood touching their impeccable attire. The duo moved in tandem, weaving through the undead with a choreographed dance of death. Peter sliced through the decayed flesh, while MJ swung her bat, smashing in zombie skulls with a satisfying thud. The once dangerous soldiers, now reduced to mindless threats, fell before them in a synchronized display of combat prowess. Their movements were efficient, a testament to the experience they had gained across the multiverse. The duo fought not out of necessity but as a form of catharsis, a release of pent-up energy from spending so long in the car. As MJ took care of the last few zombies, their bodies crumpling to the ground, Peter looked toward the entrance and noticed multiple cameras that were following their every movement. With a casual wave, his katana still dripping blood, Peter spoke up at the camera. "Yo." Inside the CDC, the sterile environment of a laboratory stood in stark contrast to the chaos outside. Edwin Jenner, a man in a lab coat with an intense focus in his eyes, worked diligently while his wife, Candace Jenner, lay strapped to a table. The deadly fungal infection had spread across her arm, leaving her in a dire state. "Edwin, we both know that you won't be able to dash," she spoke, trying to break the news of her inevitable death to her husband, but the man wouldn't listen. "No," he shouted, unwilling to even entertain the idea of her dying. "I'll do all that I can to delay the spread while we figure out a way to kill the spores. Don't you dare give up on me." As Edwin ran another test, desperately trying to slow the progression of the fungus in his wife, a series of monitors displayed various camera feeds from the outside. The cameras were scattered throughout the CDC, capturing every angle of the compound's exterior. Edwin and Candace observed the unfolding events with a mixture of awe and shock. The virologists dedicated to studying the fungus that had ravaged the world were witnessing something extraordinary. The duo outside, Peter and MJ, moved with a precision and agility that defied the capabilities of a normal human body. The screens displayed the duo's combat prowess, their synchronized movements a testament to a level of skill that seemed almost otherworldly. Edwin couldn't help but marvel at their abilities, realizing that what he was witnessing transcended the boundaries of ordinary human capabilities. As the last zombie met its demise, crushed by MJ's baseball bat, Peter, with his katana still dripping blood, looked directly at one of the cameras. With a casual wave, he addressed the unseen observers inside the CDC. "Yo, do you mind if we come inside?" he asked causally. Edwin and Candace exchanged a glance, both captivated and perplexed by what they had just witnessed. Candace, strapped to the table, managed a weak smile. "Edwin, did you see that? I've never seen anything like it. I'm not hallucinating, am I?" she asked. After all, Edwin has been pumping her full of all sorts of medicinal concoctions, hoping to further slow the spread of the infection. Edwin, though impressed, decided to ignore the odd visitors. "Forget about that, we need to focus on you. We can't be distracted by..." His words were cut off as the monitors continued to display Peter and MJ, the duo who seemed to defy the very laws of nature. They moved toward the thick and heavy metal shutters at the front entrance. "What are they doing?" Edwin muttered as he watched Peter bend down and grip the bottom of the shutter. "He can't really think that he'll be able to lift that, can he? I mean, it has to weigh at least a few tons." Surprisingly, before the couple's bewildered eyes, Peter managed to pull the metal shutter open with ease, lifting it just high enough for them to step inside. As Peter and MJ entered the CDC building, the heavy metal shutters dropped behind them, sealing off the outside world. Inside, the sterile environment of the lobby felt like a stark contrast to the chaos they had just encountered. Still watching over the cameras, Edwin Jenner, the head virologist, wasted no time in reacting. As soon as the duo was inside, he hit the emergency alarm, and a blaring sound echoed throughout the CDC. Within moments, a group of armed guards rushed into the lobby, surrounding Peter and MJ with their weapons drawn. The guards were on high alert, their eyes fixed on the intruders. However, the sight before them was perplexing. Instead of reacting with fear or panic, Peter and MJ sat calmly, almost as if the guns pointed at them were inconsequential. Edwin, arriving shortly after the guards, had a fearful expression on his face. He wasn't entirely sure what to expect from the duo, having witnessed their extraordinary abilities through the cameras. As he approached, Peter smiled and greeted him. "Hello, sorry to barge in like that. I'm Peter and this." He introduced himself before gesturing to his right. "Is my wife, MJ. We came to see if the CDC was still active." The leading guard, sensing the potential danger, turned to Edwin and insisted that he leave the scene. "Sir, you need to step away quickly. We can't risk you getting infected or killed. You're the only one who can make a cure," he urged, his eyes imploring Edwin to listen to him. "Who's going to cure your wife if you're gone?" "His wife is still alive," Peter and MJ both thought at the same time. After all, she died in the show long before Rick and his group showed up. The stakes were as high as they could get. Edwin's expertise was crucial for the ongoing research to combat the fungal outbreak, and the guards wanted to minimize any risk to him. Edwin hesitated, torn between the urgency of his work and the unfolding situation. Reluctantly, he backed away, his gaze lingering on the guards and the peculiar intruders. With Edwin out of immediate danger, the guards remained focused on Peter and MJ, their guns unwavering. Peter, undeterred by the lethal threat, turned his attention to Edwin. "You should really stop them. Things won't end well if this continues." "You're right, they won't end well for you," the head guard spoke before Eden could reply. "Now, on the ground with your hand behind your head." As the guards closed in, attempting to detain Peter and MJ, the atmosphere in the CDC lobby tensed. The armed men, fueled by the urgency of their duty, surrounded the intruders, their guns poised for action. However, Peter and MJ remained unfazed. "No," he replied plainly. Despite the imminent threat, they sat calmly, the air thick with an unspoken confidence. The guards, growing impatient, decided to escalate the situation, attempting to physically subdue the intruders. In an instant, the dynamic shifted. Peter and MJ, demonstrating their exceptional physical prowess once again, shocking the guards who didn't see what Edwin saw through the cameras only minutes earlier. Peter, standing to his feet, sidestepped a guard's lunge, swiftly disarming him before smashing the stick of his rifle into his face. Simultaneously, MJ deftly incapacitated another guard with a calculated strike to the gut. Both collapsed to the ground, one unconscious, the other gasping for air. It became clear to the onlooking guards that these were no ordinary intruders. Their combat skills were extraordinary, and attempts to physically overpower them proved futile. After seeing their comrades beaten so easily, they decided to open fire on the intruders. But guns didn't seem to work either. Peter and MJ seemed to be able to dodge bullets as they ran circles around the guards, incapacitating them one by one. After a minute or two, Peter and MJ subdued all of the guards without causing severe any harm, though they would feel some aches and pains for next week or so. Once the guards were neutralized, Peter addressed Edwin, who was practically cowering in the corner at this point. "Hey Doc, mind if we have a chat?" he called out, his tone casual yet unwavering. Edwin nodded his head dumbly, too afraid to refuse. "As sure." Sighing in annoyance, MJ reassured the scared scientist. "We didn't come here cause trouble or harm anyone, so you can calm down. As long as you don't attack us, we won't attack you." The CDC lobby, once filled with tension, now stood in an uneasy calm. With the guards either knocked out or growing in pain on the floor, Peter and MJ walked over to Edwin, who still seemed wary and frightened of them. As they approached, Edwin couldn't help but ask, "Who are you people?" Peter, still composed and calm, extended a hand to the antsy virologist. "Like I said, I'm Peter, and this is MJ. We came here for supplies. I wanted to loot your equipment so I could make a cure for the infected, but we didn't expect anyone to be here." "I see," Edwin muttered as he shook Peter's hand, finding the stranger's grip rather tight. "Have you studied virology, or?" he asked, subtly doubting Peter's capabilities. Peter smirked, more than ready to prove himself. Why don't we make a deal? You can ask me any questions pertaining to virology, and if I answer them all correctly, you have to let me examine your wife's condition. How does that sound? Edwin, still wary and curious about Peter and MJ's abilities, hesitated for a moment before accepting the challenge. Alright then, Peter. If you're claiming to know virology, let's put that to the test. I'm going to ask you some advanced questions, and I want precise, detailed answers. Why wouldn't he accept? After all, having another set of hands, who actually studied virology and understood the science would be a godsend for him right now. Worst case scenario, Peter will fail the test and stick around, possibly aiding in protecting the CDC. Best case scenario, Peter is a genius who could actually cure his wife, or at least help him cure her. Peter, maintaining his calm demeanor, nodded in agreement. Sure, hit me with your best shot. Edwin, seizing the opportunity to gauge Peter's knowledge, delved into the intricacies of virology. Let's start with a complex one. Explain the process of reverse transcription in retroviruses and its significance in viral replication. Peter, without missing a beat, began to explain the complexities of retroviral replication. Reverse transcription is a key step in the life cycle of retroviruses, such as HIV. During this process, the viral RNA genome is reverse transcribed into DNA by the enzyme reverse transcriptase. This results in the formation of a complementary DNA, cDNA, strand, which is then integrated into the host cell genome by another viral enzyme, integrase. He continued, providing additional details. This integration allows the retrovirus to exist as a provirus within the host cell, lying dormant until later activation. The significance of reverse transcription lies in its unique nature among viruses, as most viruses utilize DNA to RNA replication. Retroviruses, however, reverse this process, making them distinct and posing challenges in terms of antiviral strategies. Edwin, impressed but undeterred, threw another question at Peter. Alright, let's explore the field of antiviral drugs. Explain the mechanism of action of nucleotide analogues and how they inhibit viral replication. Peter responded confidently. Nucleotide analogues are antiviral drugs designed to mimic the structure of nucleotides, the building blocks of DNA and RNA. These analogues are incorporated into the growing viral nucleic acid chain during replication, but due to their altered structure, they cause premature termination of the chain. He elaborated further, emphasizing the inhibitory effect on viral replication. By disrupting the synthesis of viral nucleic acids, nucleotide analogues prevent the completion of the viral genome, ultimately inhibiting viral replication. Notable examples include drugs like acyclovir for herpes viruses and tenofovir for HIV. Edwin, finding himself increasingly convinced of Peter's knowledge, decided to test the boundaries further. Alright, one more question. How do viruses evade the host immune system, specifically focusing on mechanisms like antigenic variation? Peter, with a slight grin, delved into the complexities of viral immune evasion. Antigenic variation is a strategy employed by some viruses to escape recognition by the host immune system. This involves altering the surface proteins, such as the viral coat or spike proteins, making them unrecognizable to previously developed host antibodies. He continued, providing a detailed explanation. This continuous alteration in the viral antigenic profile hampers the host's ability to mount an effective immune response. It's commonly observed in influenza viruses, where mutations in hemagglutinin and neuraminidase proteins lead to the emergence of new viral strains, requiring updated vaccines. Edwin, thoroughly impressed by Peter's in-depth responses, nodded approvingly. You certainly have a profound understanding of virology. I never expected someone to answer these questions with such precision. Who are you really? You're far too young to be this knowledgeable. Peter, thankful that he was forced to study virology in Camartage, offered a simple response. Just someone trying to help. Now, how about we go and see my new patient? Edwin hesitated, torn between the promise of a potential cure and the fear for his wife's safety. The apprehension lingered on his face as he considered whether to trust these mysterious intruders with the well-being of his wife. Just as the silence became almost unbearable, the intercom crackled to life. Candace's weak voice filled the room, breaking through Edwin's uncertainty. Edwin, bring them to the lab. I'll be waiting. A wave of relief washed over Edwin. He looked at Peter and MJ, a mix of gratitude and curiosity in his eyes. You heard her. Follow me. Edwin led them through the labyrinthine corridors of the CDC until they reached the main lab. There, in the center of the room, Candace sat on a hospital bed. Peter couldn't help but notice the ominous presence of the fungal infection on her arm. The tendrils seemed to snake into her flesh, a visible reminder of the relentless invasion. Without waiting for any formalities, Peter approached Candace, gently taking her arm into his hands. "Impressive work, slowing the spread like this," he commented, observing the intricacies of the fungal invasion. "How long have you been infected?" Candace, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and resignation, replied, "It happened on the day of the outbreak, about a week ago." Peter nodded thoughtfully, his mind already racing with possibilities. "You've managed to hold it off for this long. That's promising." He turned to Edwin, who watched anxiously. "I need some tools, a sterile environment, and your assistance. We might be able to slow this down further, if not cure it completely." Edwin, a small bit of hope flickering in his eyes, gestured towards the lab equipment. "Anything you need, it's all at your disposal, but nothing experimental or life-threatening without my approval. I want to cure my wife, not kill her off even quicker." As Peter worked with precision, examining the extent of the infection, he engaged in conversation. "Candace, you're lucky to have someone like Edwin looking out for you. Not everyone in this world has someone fighting for them." Candace managed a weak smile. "I know. I'm grateful, but it's been getting worse, and I don't want him to get his hopes up. I can feel it spreading. I know that I don't have much time left," she said, her eyes turning up to Peter, a hint of hope shining through. "Can you really help?" Peter met her gaze with a mixture of determination and empathy. "I've dealt with some unusual cases before. Trust me, you'll be fine, I promise." As Peter continued his examination and began preparing some nearby equipment, Edwin couldn't help but voice the question that weighed heavily on his mind. "Can you cure her?" "Truly?" Peter looked up from his work, meeting Edwin's gaze. After a brief pause, he nodded. "Yeah, just follow my lead and she'll be back to normal by the end of the day." Edwin, though aware of the uncertainties, clung to the hope that had been rekindled. "Do whatever it takes. I can't lose her." Peter nodded solemnly, fully aware of the responsibility that rested on his shoulders. "Don't worry, I got this." In the meticulously organized CDC lab, Peter gathered the compounds and ingredients Edwin hastily provided. Each vial and flask contained a piece of the puzzle he needed to unravel the intricacies of the fungal infection. The guards, now cautiously observing from a safe distance, both wary and scarred because of their earlier encounter with the seemingly superhuman intruders. Although nobody but MJ noticed, Peter had subtly employed the mystic arts to scan the fungal growth on Candace's arm. He knew that it would take far too much time if he did things the normal way. Though he also had to make the cure in a way that the inhabitants of this world could produce without him. So in order to bypass all of the diagnoses and testing, Peter simply used magic to figure out exactly what he needed. The lab equipment hummed with anticipation as he mixed, measured, and manipulated the substances before him. The guards, still nursing their earlier bruises, exchanged glances, uncertain of what to make of this unexpected turn of events. In the midst of the scientific dance, Peter's hands moved with purpose. The mystic arts allowed him to see beyond the visible, to understand the subtle nuances of the fungus. He identified the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of the fungal strands, gaining insights that no conventional virologist could fathom. As he neared the completion of the serum, Edwin and Candace watched with a mix of hope and skepticism. Peter was working far too quickly and seemed extremely sure of himself, and this behavior made them wonder if he was just messing around, or if he was some sort of eccentric genius. Finally, once he was finished, a light green-colored serum sat securely in the vial on the table. And without a word, Peter filled a syringe and injecting the serum into Candace's other arm. Instantly, the tension in the room skyrocketed. Edwin, unable to contain his anxiety, erupted in anger. "What the hell are you doing? You can't just inject her without testing it first. You're playing with my wife's life." Edwin's voice reverberated through the lab, his fear and frustration unleashed in a torrent of emotions. Amidst Edwin's outburst, the guards shifted uneasily, torn between intervening and witnessing the potential catastrophe. Peter, however, remained composed, meeting Edwin's gaze with an unwavering confidence. Just as tension reached its peak, a collective gasp swept through the room. Candace, her eyes widened in astonishment, felt the aching pain of the fungal infection evaporate. The guards, jaws dropped, witnessed the fungal tendrils writhing and squirming before crumbling into ash. Candace's arm, once a battleground for the invasive organism, now bore scars that promised healing. Edwin, frozen in shock, stared at his wife in disbelief. Candace, tears streaming down her face, whispered words of gratitude and joy. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she repeated over and over. Peter's calm demeanor persisted as he explained. "Sometimes, you just have to trust the process." The guards, recovering from their initial shock, exchanged bewildered glances. The scene before them defied all logic and challenged the boundaries of their understanding. Edwin, emotions swirling within him, approached Peter with a mix of gratitude and skepticism. What did you do? Edwin's voice wavered between awe and suspicion. Peter, meeting Edwin's gaze, simply replied, I did what I said I'd do. She'll be fine now. The gravity of the moment sank in as Candace, now free from the clutches of the zombie infection, embraced her husband, who sat at her bedside, bewildered by how easily Peter succeeded in what would have required months or even years for him to accomplish. Edwin, overwhelmed with gratitude, couldn't find the words to express the magnitude of his emotions. I don't know how you did it, but thank you. Thank you so much, he said, tears welling up in his eyes. In the aftermath of this miraculous intervention, Peter's unorthodox methods left a mark on everyone in the CDC. The crying couple, who refused to end their embrace even now, felt extremely indebted to Peter, but most of all, they were impressed. After all, they both studied virology for their entire lives, so they knew how gifted he must be. Even the guards, who were initially adversaries, now stood in respect after witnessing what appeared to be a miracle. After everyone in the lab calmed down, the earlier wariness and skepticism completely gone, Edwin began to disinfect and bandaging his wife's scarred arm. The scars served as a testament to the battle fought and won against an insidious foe. Candace, her eyes reflecting newfound hope, whispered her thanks once more. Edwin and Candace, now convinced of the serum's efficacy, bombarded Peter with questions, excited to finally rid the world of the outbreak. So, your serum destroys the infected spores? What exactly does it do? Edwin questioned, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Peter nodded, a casual smile on his face. As you said, it targets and destroys the spores, but it should also act as a sort of vaccination, arming your body to do so once again if it has to. Candace's body should now be equipped to fend off the spores on its own. Of course, we'll need to run some tests to be sure. Edwin couldn't contain his enthusiasm. We need to test this, make sure it works as you say. If it does, we could save so many lives. Peter nodded his head. Sure, let's run some tests. The CDC lab transformed into a hive of activity as the group spent the rest of the day conducting experiment. Candace, the initial patient, underwent various tests to confirm the serum's effectiveness. Alongside her, a few infected, who were captured at the beginning of the outbreak, served as unwilling subjects for scientific scrutiny. The results were nothing short of magnificent. The serum, when administered and tested in various forms, lived up to Peter's assurances. The gas experiment, in particular, where they locked a zombie in a sealed room and released the serum as a gas, showcased its potent ability to eradicate the zombie infection. The once animated corpse now lay lifeless, devoid of spores and mold. As the entire room celebrated after watching the zombie collapse into a dead body, realization dawned upon them. This serum had the potential to revolutionize the fight against the infected. Edwin, overwhelmed by the implications, took a moment to absorb the magnitude of this breakthrough. In the midst of the jubilation, Peter eyed the cured zombie before muttering yo himself. It might work. What might work? MJ asked, drawing everyone's attention toward Peter. Peter turned to the group before voicing his thoughts. I'm not 100% sure, but if, and only if, for those turned recently, and we're still alive during the process, the serum might be able to cure them. Well, yeah, it's already doing that. One of the guards spoke. Peter shook his head. No, I mean they might still be able to live afterwards, like Candace but much more extreme. A stunned silence fell upon the room. The notion that the serum could potentially revive, so you speak, the infected instead of leaving behind corpses was a game-changer. The group, once celebrating, now contemplated the profound impact this could have on their fight against the outbreak. As the weight of this revelation settled, Edwin's expression shifted from excitement to contemplation. If this is true, we could save countless lives. We have to act quickly, conduct more tests, and if it works, we'll need a lot more supplies and manpower. This changes everything, Candace muttered. Peter nodded, acknowledging the urgency of the situation. We need to move fast. Time is of the essence. Let's gather more subjects and run tests. Since they were the strongest in the CDC, Peter and MJ went out to find the right zombie for their test. And it didn't take them long to return, dragging what appeared to be a person without any injuries, who had only turned about a couple of days ago. Swiftly, the group locked the freshly infected man into a sealed room, tension thick in the air. The previous success with Candace fueled their hopes, but this time the stakes were higher. This man, untouched by injuries or decay, might hold the key to a breakthrough in their fight against the infected. The room sealed, they released the gaseous serum once again, watching with bated breath as it permeated the space. The green mist curled and twisted, engulfing the man in its transformative dance. For a moment, it seemed as if time hung suspended, and then the transformation reached its crescendo. As the mist settled, the once infected man lay on the floor, appearing lifeless. Doubt crept into the room, faces etched with uncertainty. Was this serum truly the game-changer they hoped for? Edwin, a mix of anxiety and anticipation, rushed inside the room. Kneeling beside the man, he checked for a pulse. The room held its breath as Edwin's eyes widened with realization. He's alive! The serum had not only eradicated the spores but had given life back to the recently turned. A collective gasp swept through the room as the implications of this discovery sunk in. The infected, under the right circumstances, could be saved. Peter's conjecture had transformed into a tangible reality before their eyes. Excitement and hope flickered in the eyes of the group as they stared at the once infected man, now breathing and alive. The boundaries of what was believed possible in the face of the outbreak expanded, and a newfound determination settled in their hearts. Edwin, his voice carrying a mix of awe and disbelief, broke the silence. This changes everything. With this serum, we have the power not only to cure but to bring back those recently turned. We can save lives on a scale we never thought possible. Peter, satisfied with his work, nodded in agreement. We need to start mass producing the serum immediately, he said, and nobody disagreed. Edwin frowned out of nowhere. But we'll need a lot more manpower. This building has the right facilities to mass produce the serum, but we'll need people to administer it, and supplies for the serum once we eventually run out. Peter simply smirked as he pulled a military radio out of his jacket. I can handle the manpower, just start producing the serum. In the bustling heart of the CDC's mass production center, Peter marveled at the efficiency of the high-tech machinery churning out the life-saving serum. The air was thick with the hum of equipment and the scent of chemical compounds, a stark contrast to the chaos that had plagued the facility before Peter arrived. He couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment, knowing that this serum held the potential to alter the course of the zombie apocalypse. Major Lewis's voice crackled over the military radio, breaking Peter's contemplation. Sir, this is Major Lewis. I've got around 100 soldiers ready to roll, along with shipping trucks for the serum. Where do you want us? Peter, feeling a surge of urgency, wasted no time in directing the Major. Head to the CDC in Atlanta. All they have to do is load up the serum and ship it safely back to base. Once the serum arrives, you need to administer it to everyone there, and then we'll discuss further plans. The Major's enthusiasm was palpable. You got it. We'll make this happen. As the radio fell silent, Peter turned his attention to the bustling production floor. The thought of saving lives on such a grand scale filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. However, a nagging realization tugged at the edges of his consciousness. This wouldn't be enough. The serum production, as impressive as it was, wouldn't reach everyone affected by the outbreak. The world is a big place after all. Approaching MJ, who was overseeing the operation with a focused intensity, Peter hesitated for a moment before voicing his concerns. MJ, I need you to stay here and manage everything. Make sure the serum is distributed as efficiently as possible. I have to go out there and reach the places we can't with just trucks. MJ met his gaze, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had enjoyed the luxury of holding back their powers and treated this apocalyptic world as a vacation, but now the time for action had arrived. I've got this, Peter. Go do what you do best. With a nod of gratitude, Peter turned to leave but stopped as a thought crossed his mind. We're leaving this universe after this, MJ. Get ready to say your goodbyes to everyone. MJ raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. Random destination again? Peter chuckled. Yeah, let's keep the adventure going. I just hope that the next destination isn't apocalyptic. If I can, I'd much rather have regular showers, hot water, and food delivery. MJ could help but laugh, nodding her head in agreement. Yeah, you don't realize how much you miss stuff like that until it's gone, huh? Before heading out, Peter grabbed a vial of the serum and waved his hand, conjuring a portal shimmering with a golden glow. Edwin and Candace, who were positioned nearby, watched this happen with shocked faces. They knew that Peter and MJ were abnormal, but not this abnormal. Stepping through, Peter cast a brief glance back at MJ, who gave him a supportive nod. The portal snapped shut behind him, leaving the bustling CDC lab in shock. MJ, seeing the looks on Edwin and Candace's faces, couldn't help but sigh in annoyance. Since Peter wasn't very discreet with his exit, now she was stuck with answer all sorts of questions. The portal sealed behind Peter, leaving him perched atop a towering building, the familiar skyline of New York City stretching before him. This place, his home in another universe, now stood as a haunting reflection of its former glory. The bustling streets, now overrun by the undead, bore witness to the chaos that had consumed the world. From his storage necklace, Peter produced an enchanted jug, a relic from his past adventures when he was collecting blood for the resurrection elixir. With a twist of the cap, he opened the jug and began pouring the miraculous serum inside. The enchantment ensured that the jug would infinitely reproduce whatever substance it held, a feature Peter added himself. Levitating the jug before him, Peter traced golden spell circles in the air, his hands moving with practiced precision. The intricate patterns glowed with otherworldly energy as he chanted incantations. With a final flourish, Peter activated the spell, causing the jug to flip upside down. Instantly, a torrent of green smoke billowed out, forming a cascading waterfall that descended upon the city below. As the serum-infused mist enveloped the streets, the reaction among the zombies was instantaneous. The fungal growth on their bodies writhed and squirmed before succumbing to the magic-infused cure. The spores disintegrated into ash, leaving behind bodies that crumpled to the ground. Some were still alive, while others lay in a state of long-deserved rest. Peter observed from his vantage point as the green smoke spread, a tide of restoration washing over the entire city. Streets that had echoed with the cacophony of the undead now fell silent, their once lifeless inhabitants given a second chance at life. The air, once thick with decay, now carried a hint of renewal. Millions were cured, and the fungus that had plunged the city into an apocalyptic nightmare was eradicated. As the last remnants of the serum dissipated, Peter knew his work here was done. But this was just the beginning. There were more cities to save, more lives to restore. If I knew the cure would practically bring people back to life, so to speak, then I would have done this sooner, Peter thought, but he didn't dwell on it. After all, this world would have been much worse off without his interference, so he didn't feel too guilty. At least a big portion of the population would be saved, not to mention the fact that zombies will become completely extinct in a matter of weeks, maybe months. Before departing, Peter snapped his fingers, conjuring countless sheets of paper imbued with a concise message. The flyers fluttered down like gentle snow, spreading across the city. Each contained instructions on the cure's composition and how to reproduce it. Peter hoped that humanity, now given a lifeline, would seize the opportunity to rebuild. Opening a portal to his next destination, Peter cast a final glance over the revitalized city. The skyline, once shrouded in despair, now stood as a testament to the power of redemption. With a determined nod, he stepped through the portal, leaving behind a city reborn and venturing forth to repeat the miracle across every other major city across the globe. While Peter traversed city after city, leaving a trail of revitalized metropolises in his wake, the situation at the quarry camp outside Atlanta took a grim turn. The group, tasked with collecting food for the camp, returned with meager supplies and an unexpected addition to their ranks, Rick Grimes. Tensions escalated when Rick, discovering his wife Lori's affair, took matters into his own hands and shot the man involved. Now, with Rick bound to a tree, the camp's key members, T-Dog, Andrea, Glenn, Morales, Merle, Daryl, etc., including a distraught Lori, gathered to decide the fate of the man who had just become a murderer. The air was thick with unease as the group grappled with the moral complexities of Rick's actions. As discussions unfolded, opinions diverged on how to handle Rick's presence. Some sympathized with the betrayal he had suffered, understanding the raw emotions that led to such a drastic response. Even Merle was arguing for him, which truthfully didn't help his case. Others, however, argued that murder couldn't be justified, even in the face of infidelity. After all, cheating wasn't against the law, no matter how unforgivable it might be. Lori remained silent, her gaze shifting between her deceased lover, who lay across the camp with a blanket over his body, and the man responsible for his death. Guilt and anger warred within her, torn between the pain of betrayal and the belief that Rick's actions were excessive. When they couldn't come to a decision, the conversation pivoted from Rick's fate to the pressing issue of a food shortage. Look, we can worry about this homicidal cuck later. Right now, we need to figure out our food situation, Daryl spoke, receiving a self-deprecating chuckle from Rick. My brother and I can only hunt so much before the surrounding forest is cleared out. And even then, a single deer only feeds the camp for a day, and there ain't much deer in this area to begin with. Rick, knowing that his son needed food, shared valuable information. Back in Kings County, the military is taking in survivors. They offered me a place there once I found my family, but as you can see, things didn't exactly go as I'd hoped. If you want food and a safe place to live, I'd suggest you go there. The mere mention of a secure location with military protection piqued the interest of the desperate group. Rick elaborated on the survivors at Kings County Hospital, led by a man named Peter. He described their plans to clear the city and create a safe haven, a beacon of hope in the midst of the apocalypse. Suspicion lingered in the air as some members questioned Rick's motives. Sounds too good to be true to me. Even Merle, who was in Rick's side just moments ago, didn't believe him. They couldn't help but wonder whether he was spinning a tale to secure his own safety, or was he genuinely trying to help them? The camp members argued fervently, torn between the promise of safety and the uncertainty surrounding Rick's credibility. Rick, seemingly indifferent to the skepticism, shrugged. "I ain't lying," he asserted, igniting a heated debate among the group. "You can use that radio over there to contact them." He gestured to the radio sat in the pile of stuff that was confiscated after he killed Shane. Instantly, all eyes turned to the radio as everyone wondered, is he actually telling the truth? In the dimly lit camp, the radio sat in the center of a crowded group, surrounded by skeptical eyes. Glenn, with a determined expression, reached for the device and hesitated for a moment before pressing the transmission button. The crackling sound filled the air as he spoke into the mic. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" A brief silence hung in the air, tension building as the group awaited a response. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the radio, and it wasn't the static they expected. "This is Major Lewis. Who the hell is this, and how did you get on our frequency?" The camp members exchanged shocked glances, and all eyes turned to Rick. The realization hit them like a thunderbolt. He wasn't lying. A military connection was indeed within reach. Major Lewis's voice continued, demanding answers, and Glenn stumbled over his words as he explained the situation. "Major Lewis, sir, we didn't mean to intrude. We were just trying to figure out if this guy, Rick, was telling the truth about you. We didn't expect to get a real military guy on the radio." Glenn paused for a moment, working up the courage to finally ask. Sir, can we join your camp? We've got more than 50 people, children included, who all need food and water. If we don't get some help soon, I'm afraid we won't make it past the week." The Major's response was laced with confusion. "Rick? You mean the coma patient? Hold on a second." There was a pause, the static filling the void of silence. The gravity of the moment sank in, and the camp members exchanged astonished glances. They had stumbled upon a lifeline in this apocalyptic nightmare, and it was more than any of them had dared to hope for. But the surprise didn't end there. MJ's voice, calm and collected, emerged over the radio waves. "Major Lewis, this is MJ. I overheard your conversation." Peter gave Rick a radio before he left and invited him to join us again after he found his family. "Can you pick them up?" Major Lewis hesitated, processing the unexpected turn of events. "I'm sorry, but we're already spread thin as it is with building the wall, cleaning up the town, and now I have men on their way to you to transport the cure from the CDC." Instantly, all eyes widened as Glenn nearly dropped the radio out of pure shock. Cleaning up a town? Building a wall? Those two things were incredible already, as it meant that Rick's talk of a safe haven was real, but that wasn't what sent them all into a stunned silence. Andrea was the first to speak. "Did he just say cure?" "I think he did," Morales muttered as he and everyone else turned to Glenn. Talking over the radio again, Glenn asked for clarification. "I'm sorry, but did you just say cure? Like a cure for the outbreak?" "Yes," MJ replied curtly, "but we can discuss that later. Where are you right now?" Hope filled everyone's eyes as Glenn swiftly answered. "We're at the old abandoned Quint Materials Company road base quarry outside of Atlanta." "Good, you're close by," MJ replies as if she didn't already know where they were. "Start packing and I'll send some soldiers over to pick you up by the end of the day tomorrow." The camp members, still in shock, listened to the exchange with wide-eyed amazement. The prospect of being rescued by the military felt like a dream come true. Soon enough, the radio went silent, leaving the camp members to contemplate the whirlwind of events. Rick, bound to the tree, glanced around at the faces of those who had doubted him. The irony of being both the problem and the solution wasn't lost on him. Suddenly Lori spoke. What are we supposed to tell them when they come and see Rick tied up like this?" After all, they failed to mention the fact that Rick, their only connection to these military people, killed someone. The camp members exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of their decisions and the impending arrival of military rescue settling over them. Time passed swiftly, and the military convoy dispatched by Major Lewis arrived at the CDC. With military precision, they swiftly gathered the cure, boxes and crates filled to the brim, loading up their trucks before heading it once again. MJ, having entrusted Edwin with the CDC's operations for the time being, joined the convoy. After all, she promised to pick up the survivors at the quarry camp, not to mention the fact that she wanted to see more characters from the show. It didn't take long for the convoy to make its way to the old abandoned quarry outside Atlanta. Excitement buzzed among the survivors as they prepared to leave the confines of their temporary home. Meanwhile, Rick remained tied, a tense atmosphere surrounding him. MJ, who rode shotgun at the front of the convoy, surveyed the scene with a mixture of anticipation and concern. As the military vehicles rolled to a stop, the survivors greeted their saviors with eager smiles. However, MJ's eyes widened as they fell upon Rick, bound in ropes. Carl, his son, stood at a safe distance, longingly eyeing his bound father. But sadly his mother wouldn't let him go anywhere near Rick. Approaching the group, MJ demanded an explanation. The camp members hesitated before Andrea stepped forward. Rick found Shane sleeping with his wife, Lori, and shot him in the head. We've kept him tied up since then, as we didn't know what else to do. MJ's expression tightened as she processed the revelation. This complicates things, she muttered under her breath. After a moment of contemplation, she issued a directive, hand him over. We'll deal with this later. Everyone, load up. We're leaving. The survivors, visibly relieved that the military hadn't abandoned them after learning about Rick's actions, hurriedly obeyed MJ's orders. Trucks were loaded with supplies, and the once desolate camp began to buzz with activity. Lori, however, wasn't content to let the matter slide. As they prepared to depart, Lori watched with a mix of frustration and disbelief as MJ approached Rick with a knife. "What are you doing?" Lori protested, her voice tense. MJ looked at Lori, her expression stern. Cutting him loose. With a swift motion, she sliced through the ropes binding Rick, his limbs freed. Lori, unable to contain her frustration, spoke up again. "He killed Shane. What kind of justice is this?" Daryl, who had been nearby, stepped in, his voice low and firm. "Look, lady, you really want to argue with them?" He gestured toward the armed soldiers that protectively followed MJ's every move. "We're getting a ride to safety, so best keep quiet and enjoy it, understood?" Lori bit her lip in contemplation, her gaze flickering between MJ, the soldiers, and her now free ex-husband. In the face of military authority and the prospect of safety, she reluctantly relented. "Fine." As the trucks rumbled away, packed full of crates of serum and rescued survivors, MJ couldn't help but look over at Rick, wondering what they should do about him. Didn't he kill Shane in the show as well? She thought. Whatever, we're leaving soon anyway, so somebody else can deal with it. Returning to the town that Rick had spoken about, the survivors from the quarry were met with a hive of activity. The once desolate streets were now abuzz with soldiers and civilians diligently working. Shipping containers were strategically placed to create a protective barrier, surrounding the town and warding off potential threats from the infected. The sight was surreal, a manifestation of safety in the midst of chaos. As the trucks rolled through the entrance, the survivors couldn't help but marvel at the transformation. The town's exterior was fortified, streets being cleaned of blood and bodies, the air filled with the scent of a burning campfire. Military personnel, armed and vigilant, patrolled the streets, turning the once ravaged town into a beacon of hope. Even tanks rumbled through the town, a visible display of the military's commitment to securing the area. Upon seeing this, Daryl turned to his brother, a look of concern clear in his eyes. Merle, knowing what his brother would say, cut him off. I know, I'll be on my best behavior." After all, he didn't feel like pissing off the military either. The survivors from the quarry, now seeing the safe haven that Rick had promised, found it hard to contain their emotions. Tears flowed freely as they absorbed the scene before them. The town, nearly enclosed by shipping containers, represented a sanctuary, a stark contrast to the horrors they had endured up until now. Upon arriving at the hospital camp, where everyone was temporarily staying until the town was fully secured, the quarry group was met with warm smiles and open arms. The town's population, a mix of military personnel and survivors, welcomed them with smiles on their faces. The stark difference in atmosphere from the grim quarry camp brought a sense of relief to the newcomers. The military wasted no time in unloading the trucks filled with crates of the cure. The survivors watched in awe as soldiers efficiently organized the operation. Trucks, each laden with boxes containing the life-saving serum, lined the street. In an orderly fashion, the group from the quarry was directed to a designated area. Doctors, clad in protective gear, efficiently administered the cure to each member. The survivors, still overwhelmed by the rapid turn of events, couldn't believe their luck. Hope stirred within them as the needle pierced their skin, delivering the promise of protection from the devastating fungus. The simplicity of the process contrasted sharply with the profound impact it would have on their lives. Tears of relief and gratitude streamed down their faces as the cure flowed through their veins. The weight of uncertainty that had burdened them for so long began to lift. As the last survivor received their shot, a sense of unity filled the air. The quarry group, now officially part of this resilient town, looked around at their new surroundings. The hospital camp, bustling with activity, seemed like a temporary respite before the town's complete transformation. Hope, once a distant dream, now bloomed in the hearts of the survivors. The town, fortified and alive with the spirit of resilience, promised a chance at normalcy in a world that had long forgotten such a concept. The military presence, the cure coursing through their veins, and the newfound community around them instilled a sense of optimism for the future. The night enveloped the hospital camp in a hushed stillness. MJ lay in bed, the soft glow of a nearby lamp casting a warm ambience across the room. Her eyes flickered with a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation as she awaited Peter's return. Midnight neared, and just as the quiet darkness seemed everlasting, a golden portal materialized in the room's center. Out stepped Peter, a smile playing on his lips as he spotted MJ waiting for him in bed. "Hey, beautiful," he greeted, his voice a gentle murmur. MJ's expression softened into a smile as Peter jumped into bed beside her, pulling her into his comforting embrace. "Hey you, took you long enough. What's the story? Where've you been?" Cuddling closer to her, Peter began recounting his journey. He described how he visited every major city, administering the cure and leaving instructions for its reproduction. The magic-infused serum, now a beacon of hope, had been spread far and wide. MJ listened intently, absorbing the gravity of Peter's actions. "So, you've been saving the world as usual," she said, a smirk playing on her lip. "Yeah, pretty much," Peter nodded, a sense of accomplishment gleaming in his eyes. However, MJ raised an eyebrow. "Is that it though? I mean, you were gone for almost 2 days. With your powers, I thought you'd be back sooner." Leaning back against the headboard, Peter chuckled. "Well, there's more. I did a little cleaning along the way as well." MJ's curiosity piqued. "What kind of cleaning?" Peter explained. "I got rid of all the nukes. Everywhere. I figured, even after we deal with the zombies, the world might still be a chaotic mess. And the last thing we need is some maniac launching nukes, which would trigger others to launch theirs in retaliation until the world is destroyed. I just didn't want the world to trade one apocalypse for another. I mean, imagine zombies plus radiation. Not a great combo. So, I just poofed them away." MJ's eyes widened in realization. "Wait, you got rid of every nuke?" she asked. "What did you do with them?" Peter nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah, I just portaled them into the nearest black hole." "Huh," MJ mused. "I didn't even think of that." Peter smirked. "Well, Ned watched The Walking Dead until the end and would always fill me in. Apparently, there's some nuke drama in the later seasons or spin-off. Better safe than sorry, right?" MJ nodded her head. "Definitely," she agreed as a contemplative look appeared on her face. "Then are we leaving tomorrow?" Peter grinned, his eyes reflecting a playful spark. "Yeah, excited for the next universe?" MJ nodded as she rested her head against his chest. "But there's still other characters to save, like the Green family, who are still hiding in their farm." Peter thinks it over for a moment before speaking. "We can always leave behind some orders for the Major. Or I can just portal them into the town before we leave. I'm sure it'll scare the hell out of them, but at least they'll be safe." MJ seemed relieved upon hearing this. "Can you just portal them here? I'd rather be sure that they're okay than leave it for others to handle." Peter nodded his head. "Sure, I'll drop them into town as we leave. We can let the Major deal with the aftermath as we sail off into a new universe," he said, washing away his wife's worries. The morning sun painted the sky with hues of gold as Peter and MJ woke up and set out on their mission to locate the remaining Walking Dead characters they intended to save. Portal after portal whisked them across the United States, appearing in various locations to find these familiar faces from their memories. Without revealing themselves or exchanging introductions, Peter and MJ simply opened portals beneath the characters' feet, depositing them safely into the town. As the unknown figures kept appearing, the Major, Joel, Tommy, Michonne, Sarah, and bewildered soldiers and civilians observed the inexplicable spectacle. The Major, determined to get to the bottom of this, went looking for Peter, intending to report the unusual occurrences to him. However, upon reaching Peter's room, he found it empty, with a lackluster note left on the bed. The note simply said, "Yo, you're in charge now, Major. See ya." Beside it lay a hard drive filled with useful information, which Peter compiled on his first day in this world. The Major stared at the note in shock, wondering why Peter would leave, where he would even go, and what was the purpose of the hard drive. The sudden responsibility weighed on him as he contemplated the odd turn of events. Meanwhile, Peter and MJ concluded their rescue mission, returning to Texas to find their TARDIS-like ship unblemished in the apocalypse-riddled town, exactly where they parked it. Stepping into the ship and closing the door behind them, Peter headed towards the control panel. However, MJ interrupted him, expressing a hesitation that had been lingering. "Maybe we should bring our friends back to our universe before moving on?" I mean, I'd rather not leave people like Sarah and Michonne's son, Andre, behind, she suggested. Like you said, the world won't just go back to normal even after the zombies are gone. Peter shrugged, mulling over her suggestion. Sure, but you have to explain everything to them. With a wave of his hand, portals appeared, and Joel, Tommy, Sarah, Michonne, and Andre appeared, bewildered and fearful looks on their face. They looked around, shocked by their sudden change in surroundings. Peter offered a casual wave. Yo, welcome aboard. Joel, eyes wide in confusion, surveyed the ship with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. What the hell is this place? Peter motioned to MJ, throwing all responsibility onto her shoulders. She'll explain. After a long explanation, Michonne, cradling her son in her arms, studied Peter and MJ. So you two are on a multiverse vacation? She eyed them, shocked that they would find this hellhole as a good vacation destination. MJ shrugged. Well, you don't know this, but there are all sorts of stories in our world that are similar to what happened here, so it was like living a book or a show. She reveals. Tommy, glancing around, raised an eyebrow. So, you're just gonna take us back to your world? He asks, suspicion clear in his voice. Is it safe? Peter nodded. Yeah, as long as you want to go. Our world is about as safe as it gets. I can even get you each your own identities too, so you don't have to worry about that. I want to go. Michonne was the first to agree. This world isn't a safe place for a child to grow up. If I can give Andre a chance at a better life, then I'm willing to risk it. And just like that, everyone else agreed as well, more than willing to risk a multiverse trip to another universe to escape the dangers of their original world. As the group settled into the ship, Peter operated the controls, preparing to send them back home. Seconds later, the ship hummed to life, phasing in and out of existence before finally disappearing from this universe, leaving behind a ruined world on the brink of healing. After dropping their rescued passengers off at the Avengers Tower, where they found Tony to handle everything for them, Peter and MJ wanted to swiftly return to their vacation. But before leaving, they gathered the group to share a revelation that would impact their newfound friends greatly. Before we go, there's something you all need to know, Peter began, a mischievous glint in his eyes. In our world, you're all fictional characters, like TV shows, comic books, and video games. The faces of Joel, Tommy, Michonne, and Sarah mirrored bewilderment and disbelief. MJ chimed in, unable to contain her amusement. Yep, so feel free to look yourselves up. Tommy scratched his head, still processing the revelation. So, we're not real people? Peter turned to Tony. Deal with this for us, will you? We're still on our honeymoon. Wait a minute. I'm not your dash, Tony tried to argue. But Peter and MJ slammed the doors to the ship closed, leaving all of the responsibility in his reluctant but capable hands. As the ship disappeared, leaving behind the aftermath for Tony to handle, Peter couldn't help but grin. I bet they'll have fun on Google later. MJ chuckled, shaking her head. I wonder if they'll play The Last of Us? And with that finished, the ship sailed through the fabric of realities, ready to embrace the next universe. In the quiet village of Godric's Hollow, nestled in the picturesque West Country of England, James Potter, lord of the ancient and noble house of Potter, cradled his newborn son, Harry, in his arms. Insert picture of James Potter here. Insert picture of baby Harry here. The cozy living room of their small cottage resonated with warmth from the subtle flicker of the fireplace. In the kitchen, Lily Potter, his wife and lady of the house, orchestrated a symphony of enchanted cookware, her wand creating a culinary ballet as she delved into a high-level book about sacrificial magic. Insert picture of Lily Potter here. As the aroma of a home-cooked meal wafted through the air, Lily's thoughts were far from the kitchen. Her mind delved into the intricate magic within the pages, pondering how she could harness its power to shield her precious son. The looming threat of the Dark Lord Voldemort, a malevolent force wreaking havoc across magical Britain, hung heavily over the Potters. The reason behind the inconspicuous setting of their once opulent lives was a prophecy that marked Harry as the chosen one. Born as the seventh month died, he was destined to be Voldemort's ultimate nemesis. The Potters, knowing the Dark Lord would believe such an idiotic prophecy told by a drunken hag, were forced to seek refuge in the humble cottage, hoping to escape the clutches of Voldemort and his Death Eaters. As the family savored a moment of peace, the tranquility shattered. Wards surrounding the cottage flared to life, a defensive mechanism signaling an intruder. James sprang to his feet, rushing to the window. There, in the darkness, the snake-like figure of Voldemort emerged, draped in ominous black robes. Panic gripped the Potter family. "Insert picture of Voldemort here. It's him. He's found us!" James exclaimed, dread etched across his face. Lily, wide-eyed, clutched her wand, her mind racing to comprehend how Voldemort had breached their secret location. Peter Pettigrew, their trusted friend and secret keeper, should have safeguarded them. As the wards crumbled one by one, signaling the impending threat, James, faced with an imminent confrontation, decided to confront the Dark Wizard. With urgency, he pushed Harry into Lily's arms. "Take Harry and go. I'll hold him off." Lily hesitated, reluctant to leave her husband to face Voldemort alone, but James insisted that she had to protect Harry. With a final, lingering gaze, Lily rushed upstairs just as the last ward was destroyed, shielding Harry from the unfolding nightmare. Meanwhile, James stayed behind, his wand drawn as he confronted the Dark Lord, who broke down his door and shot a killing curse his way. Avada Kedavra, transfiguring a coffee table into a makeshift barrier to deflect the impending killing curse, James protected himself as he retaliated, magic flying back and forth, destroying their once peaceful cottage. Upstairs, Lily found herself trapped by anti-apparition wards, her attempts to teleport to safety thwarted. The sounds of the chaotic battle downstairs growing louder and louder. As she tried to soothe Harry's cries, Lily came to the conclusion that she was going to die, but at least she could make her death worthwhile. "I haven't tested it yet, but it's not like I have a choice now," she thought as she smiled down at her son, tears welling up in her eyes as she placed him in his crib. "Remember, Harry, Mommy and Daddy will always love you, even if we're not here to dash." Suddenly, before she could finish her heartfelt goodbye, the room lit up as a blue phone box materialized behind her. Lily, bewildered and alarmed, looked at the unexpected arrival, momentarily forgetting the imminent danger. Before she could even react, the door to the phone box swung open, and a young man stuck his head out. "Yo."
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.